Rage, despair and desire. The gods forsaken, cock-sucking, craven SOC. Robert raged, tearing apart the temporary war room in Castle Rock. As the Hand, Jon could only suppress his own sorrow while preparing to continue his duties. The king was in no state to make decisions that would affect the kingdom for years to come. All have their heads, Jon. All of them. I won't let this go unanswered. The king continued, and Jon moved over to place a hand on Robert's shoulder, stopping the larger man from further injuring himself in his fury. Robert, I know your pain, trust me, but if there's any hope of securing the safety of Ned's family, we need to begin deliberations, Jon urged, trying to knock the king out of his roiling emotions. You're right, Jon, Robert agreed after taking a deep breath. Gather the lords, we're marching north. Jon had to stop himself from dragging a hand across his face. This wasn't what he was aiming for when he'd mentioned Ned's family. Robert, we can't leave our back open to the Ironborn. I'm hurting just as much as you are, but our duty to the kingdom must come first, Jon scolded, prompting a scathing glare from the king. Jon wouldn't back down. Too much was at stake. I promise you, your grace, we will have our revenge, but not while the hounds are biting at our heels. Robert nodded, finally seeming to calm down as he listened. Let's put the iron cunts down first, but if you try to stop me after, I'll march alone if I must. As you say, your grace, Jon agreed, knowing he had little choice. Not that he had many objections. They couldn't allow their land to be stolen, not when it would make them appear weak. A new god's conquest. Howland Reed, Lord of Greywater Watch, drove his trident into yet another of the infernal creatures plaguing his lands. When those gifted with the green sight went mad years ago, claiming the gods had abandoned them, Howland still clung to hope. But now, he wasn't so sure. Not when literal hellspawn had been hunting his people like animals for the past week. He grabbed a cloth, wiping the sweat, grime, and blood from his face after putting down the latest of the creatures. Fortunately, his Cranogman could fend off the stragglers that wandered too close to the keep, though most of the creatures seemed to prefer lying in ambush beneath the murky swamp waters. And as if his thoughts had tempted fate, the skies darkened unnaturally, and legions of beady red eyes emerged from the tree branches above. Howland sighed, knowing there was no victory now. All he could do was pray that his wife and children somehow escaped these cursed lands alive. A new god's conquest. Raela followed the small servant creature as it led the way, heading towards the gardens where her daughter was said to be. During her time in this magical castle, her life had been akin to a dream, living in luxury beyond belief, smothering her beautiful little girl with all her love, and witnessing sights she had only imagined in fantasy. It was so fantastic, in fact, that she was constantly on edge, waiting for the other shoe to drop at any moment. Walking out into the sunny expanse of grasslands and vibrant wildflowers, the small elf bowed before vanishing into thin air. Raela found her daughter seated with the naughty girl, both sipping from a set of fine porcelain. Nearby, a young girl, who, if Raela had heard correctly, was the base-born daughter of the vile god who held her and her daughter captive, happily ran around the field, playing with the two wolves who seemed to be important figures here. Raela frowned, noticing said vile god lounging on a throne not far from her precious daughter. She was sure he hid a licentious gaze behind the indifferent one he wore in public. Who knew when he would strike? And there was nothing she could do to protect the child she had only just reconnected with. Shaking her head, there was no use agonizing over what she couldn't change. Raela walked through the yard, taking a seat next to her daughter and greeting Missandei with a smile. She knew the SOC girl loyally served the castle's god, but Raela wouldn't hold that against another innocent victim. Greetings, my lady. Would you prefer if I left you to your privacy? Missandei asked, well-spoken and courteous as always. None of that, my dear. Your presence is always a welcome one. Raela smiled as her adorable little girl nodded along. As their casual activities continued, Daenerys chatted with her friend without a care in the world, while Raela couldn't help but notice the lord eyeing her daughter like a succulent piece of meat out of the corner of her eye. Feeling like her child could be taken from her at any moment, Raela couldn't enjoy the day. She only let out a sigh of relief as the sun set and Daenerys joined her on their large mattress, quickly falling asleep in her arms after the busy day. Raela slid out of bed, walking purposefully to the room's mirror and gazing at her reflection, dimly lit by the room's magical lighting. In the thin nightgown she wore, her curves were on full display, and as vain as it sounded, she cut an undeniably striking image. During her last days, Raela knew she had looked like a walking corpse, her body ruined by the many childbirths and the abuse from her husband. Now, however, after being brought back to life, she had somehow regained her youthful beauty, while still appearing to be of the proper age at which she had died. Looking over at her peacefully sleeping child, Raela's resolve grew. The wicked god had already given her all the hints she needed, and if it meant securing her daughter's future, she wouldn't hesitate any longer. Luckily, the Lord's chambers weren't far, the beast likely wanting to keep them within reach. Nevertheless, her current mission was a simple one as she reached the large oaken doors without bumping into any of the many other residents of the castle. Creeping into the room, Raela found the place eerily quiet. She knew this god was a lustful beast, so it was more than a little strange that he wasn't currently bedding one of his women. It was suspicious, and Raela was starting to think she was simply playing at the whims of an all-knowing being. But none of that mattered if it meant protecting her daughter. Like her own smaller room, the Lord's chambers were dimly lit enough for her to reach the bed without trouble, the rhythmic breathing increasing in volume as she neared. Raela took a deep breath, slipping the flimsy straps off her shoulders as the nightgown pulled at her feet, now standing as bare as the day she was born. Hesitantly crawling onto the bed and making her way over the silk sheets, Raela found the slumbering god equally undressed in all his glory. Raela knew what she had come here to do, but as she slowly reached out a hand, her jaw fell open at the sight of the thing between his legs. What was she meant to do with such a monstrous manhood? It made the only one she'd ever seen in person look like nothing more than a measly worm. Seven hells, even her Dornish ladies-in-waiting had never described such a thing in all their many lascivious tales. Stoking her courage, Raela cautiously laid a gentle hand on the large appendage, fearing it would come alive and gobble her up. As the thing twitched in her grasp, she nearly squeaked in shock before getting herself together. Raela patted her chest, firming her resolve as she hefted the manhood in her hand, stroking it as her ladies-in-waiting had described. Too enamored with the warm flesh growing at her touch, she didn't even notice the piercing gaze watching her clumsy attempts until a deep voice brought her out of the daze she'd been in. How daring, my lady. I'd never have thought you were this type of woman, the beast spoke, nearly making her splutter an incoherent response. Why, you know why I'm here, she stuttered, and the god gave her a predatory grin. I assure you that I have absolutely no inkling of what you're referring to, he lied, making Raela grit her teeth in outrage. How dare this brute play dumb? As if it wasn't his doing that left a former queen with no other choice than to lower herself to that of a common whore. But even as she cursed the god in her mind, she didn't dare voice her grievances. Not when her daughter's safety was on the line. Please, my lord, use me as you wish, but leave my daughter alone, she begged, knowing she was completely at this god's mercy. You have my word. As long as you become mine, I'll not make any advances toward sweet little Daenerys, he told her, and despite the situation, she couldn't help but smile in relief. Noticing the golden black eyes staring at her, waiting for an answer, Raela nodded. I'll be yours, my lord, she agreed, and before she could say any more, she found herself flipped onto her back as the towering figure of the god hovered above her. Even though she was only here to fulfill the desires of a rapacious beast, Raela couldn't stop her eyes from taking in the masculine form that now pinned her down. His muscles were so enticingly perfect that she was sure no mortal could possibly achieve them, and her face flushed red when her eyes trailed down to the now fully hardened rod hovering so close. Raela, my dear, we're past formalities. Call me Lux, his deep voice rumbled, sending a shiver down her spine for reasons she couldn't comprehend. As you wish, Lux, she agreed, the act of calling this god by his name giving her an oddly pleasurable sensation. Before she could wonder why, she felt his strong hands on her thighs, forcing her legs apart as his destination became clear. When his fingers brushed against her core, she gasped, never in her life having felt such a sensation. Raela had never known something like this could feel so delightful. Not when she was taught that a woman of her birth should never act on such onanism, and her husband's gnarled, nail-topped fingers only brought pain. Sure, she'd heard of the pleasures of the flesh, but until now, Raela figured she was never meant to feel such joys. I believe you've viewed me in the wrong light this whole time, my dear Raela. I may be a monster to others, but I'll do anything for my women, he purred into her ear, his hand caressing her platinum tresses while continuing to stroke the quickly moistening folds of her womanhood. Raela, of course, had no reason to trust the words of this vile god, but as his wonderful hands continued making her feel new sensations, she was finding it hard not to fall into his web. Then, will you promise to keep me and my daughter happy? Raela asked between moans, and she felt a pair of soft lips meet her own, her pleasure reaching new heights as a sweet tongue invaded her mouth, teasing her own. Lux broke away, and Raela couldn't help feeling the loss. You and your daughter will want for nothing, he promised, trailing his seductive lips along her jaw before closing the distance between their mouths once again as she lost herself in the act. Raela knew she shouldn't. This was all too good to be true, but she couldn't deny that this man, no, God, was likely to steal her heart without much fuss. She blamed her mad husband for this. If the bastard hadn't been such a poor lover, she might have been able to withstand this god's ministrations for longer. But there was no use crying over spilled milk. And as Lux placed his large tip at the entrance of her womanhood, Raela decided to fully give in to the pleasure, screaming in ecstasy as new depths were explored for the first time. Her life would be better off if she gave him her heart, Raela told herself as her legs tightly wrapped around his strong hips, trying to feel every inch of his divine shaft as Lux continued pumping in and out of her squelching hole. And as his final thrust bottomed out, filling her womb with seed, Raela's entire body seized as she reached climax for the first time, ever. Her arms and legs went limp as she collapsed in place before feeling herself being pulled into the hot, sweaty embrace of the man who had made her feel so good that night. I don't want Daenerys to wake up alone, she mumbled into his side as she began to drift off into her dreams. Get some rest, my dear. I'll make sure you get back in time, he told her, rubbing circles into her naked back as she quickly drifted off. A new god's conquest. Lux stood in a barren section of the north, looking out to sea, with White Harbor to the north and Moat Cailin to the west. He knew the northern lords were wary of the fact that he hadn't claimed any of the castles for himself, not even the now leveled Dreadfort. But why would he settle for any of that? No, he'd build a city of his own, a city so far beyond the imagination of these simple locals that they might just keel over, believing they had somehow found themselves in heaven. First, though, he needed to give the location a makeover before sending in his team of magical builders to do all the tedious work. He'd read plenty of Stark wank fanfictions in his past life, so he figured, why not steal a decent idea that was commonly used? Concentrating, Lux connected with the Weirwood network as the magic eagerly got to doing his bidding. The earth shook, the winds howled, and animals far and wide fled for their lives. And if he hadn't absorbed the masses of shockwaves from his little stunt into the void of his darkness, any structure south of Winterfell would have collapsed to its foundation. Lux looked at his finished product with a nod. If the children of the forest could shatter the arm of Dorne in the distant past, then this little canal I've created isn't much in the grand scheme of things, he thought to himself. Still, he couldn't help but feel proud. It really was impressive. Even in the modern world he came from, nothing matched his creation, not when magic came into play. Now, Lux knew he was no expert on canals, but he did know that the process of transporting ships between two sides wasn't as simple as one might think. However, the canal in front of him had no such issue. The large waterway was more than wide enough for 2 lanes of traffic, with winds continuously coursing east to west on one side while doing the opposite on the other. Yes, this would work perfectly, Lux decided before vanishing from his spot, ready for some rest and relaxation after a hard day's work. Read ahead on my Patreon. Link. patreon.com/CodeKingu. My Pat charges every 30 days, so it doesn't matter which day of the month you join. Join my Discord. Discord. GGVP2Q8XPK4D. 8 comments 0 vote. Taken. Lux lay back in the gardens as his favorite dark elf, Ash, served succulent grapes by mouth, each bite made better by the lovely taste of his servant's lips and the wonderful view down her loose top only adding to the experience. On the side, his favorite light elf created a cool breeze as she fanned him with a comically large palm frond. She wore a cute pout because she knew her task was merely for his amusement. Excited giggles drew him from his leisure as his 4 daughters ran out of the castle, chasing Nor and Aurora into the yard. Lux smiled, seeing the twins, Cassiopeia and Aqua, along with Val's only daughter, Astrid, finally able to keep up with their older sister. As much of a little shit as Delphi could be, Lux knew his firstborn loved all her sisters and would likely grow up to be the overprotective one of his growing brood. Lux stretched in place, letting out a satisfied breath. Damn, his life was fantastic. Not only could he indulge his desires to his heart's content, but his gathered essence was constantly increasing as those loyal to him influenced the world, his faith steadily grew, and his individual growth had never ceased. By now, he'd gotten a decent grasp on how his essence of creation judged his feats and rewarded essence, his most recent influx received after acquiring the former queen, Raela, as a mistress. In this world, magic truly ran in the blood of kings. More specifically, Raela had a higher level soul than most. She wasn't just any woman he had conquered. And, considering he hadn't taken the easy route with her as he had with Bella, his gains were significantly greater. Still, that was nothing compared to the essence his gorgeous saintess had brought in with her little crusade in Slaver's Bay. He'd have to remember to reward the Jade Beauty for that later. Perhaps he'd even stop being so lazy and start his own campaign sooner or later. After all, achievements made with his own hands would only further increase his rewards. It was tempting. So tempting, in fact, that it already had him contemplating his next victim. Not only would more war and conflict increase his essence, but his religion would inevitably grow as his devoted followers forcefully converted any of the surviving small folk. And while gathering faith was his least efficient path to power, Something he'd learned fairly early as his religion began. It still had its uses, primarily for keeping his followers in line without much conscious effort on his part. Rather than being upset that faith wasn't of much use to him personally, Lux was more than happy with the arrangement. He wasn't one of those insignificant gods who were nothing without their followers. His path on the road of divinity was on a completely different level. Anyone trying to weaken him by targeting his religion might as well have been twiddling their thumbs. No, his religion didn't matter much for his strength in the long run. Instead, his divinity grew as he wove his feats into the very fabric of reality, and nothing could negate that. Lux realized that this was uncannily similar to how his essence of creation worked, and while he could think about it all day, he was nowhere near the level of drawing any concrete conclusions. Luckily, none of that mattered much for now. He could carry on with his steady growth without worry. Knocking him out of his contemplation, Ash leaned down again to feed him another piece of fruit. This time, however, Lux couldn't stop himself from slipping his tongue into the little elf's sweet mouth while reaching out to grope her tiny booty, his large hand palming one of her dusky cheeks. Hearing Leaf on the side grumbling about being left out, Lux chuckled, giving the ass in his hand a final squeeze before pulling away, the slutty dark elf whining as her lewd time was interrupted. We'll continue this later, Lux promised, leaving Ash dissatisfied while Leaf continued her pouting. Now stop acting like brats and have someone bring Jon Snow to the weirwood, he told them, rolling his eyes as he stood. Apparating into an especially dank cell, Lux decided to work out whatever minor stress he had accumulated while waiting for Jon to arrive. Wakey, wakey, he called out, a small figure in the corner trembling from his words. Please, your eminence, I've been a good boy, I swear, it pleaded, hiding its face as best it could in the coarse vegetable sack it wore as its only clothing. Holding out a Lumos charm, Lux let out a sinister snicker as he watched young Ramsay Snow shrink away from the glaring light. While his undead general, Cain, helped Val take down the wall, Abel had been sent to destroy the Dreadfort, but not before capturing its bastard. It's your lucky day, bastard. Unfortunately, I don't have time for our usual routine, Lux told the boy, who let out the breath he'd been holding as his terrified shivers dramatically calmed. Thank you, your eminence. Your compassion knows no bounds, Ramsay extolled, and Lux hummed in agreement. Yes, so I've been told. Now stand up and look at me, bastard, he commanded, his prisoner not daring to disobey as young Ramsay fearfully got to his feet. Damn, he had a punchable face, Lux couldn't help but think every time he laid eyes on the kid's ugly mug. So, of course, he did the only rational thing. He backhanded the little cunt across the dungeon, sending his small body into a heap of broken bones, not long for this world. But Lux couldn't have his stress ball giving out on him so early, he decided, sending a wave of necrotic energies that slowly, but more importantly, painfully, stitched together flesh and snapped bones back in place, the bastard's mouth silently hanging loose, his agonized wails unable to make it past his lips. Ah, that felt good, Lux thought with a smile. Turning to leave, he paused and then turned back to give the little cunt a good old-fashioned kick to the gonads before apparating away. Reappearing next to the largest weirwood on Skagos, his wait for Jon was a pleasant one, his spirits high after tormenting his prisoner. Ah, Jon, we meet at last. I hope you've been enjoying your stay in my humble home, Lux smiled at the glaring boy being led by two of his little butler elves. And, of course, the brat only gave Lux the silent treatment. Come now, I'm sure your time here has been far from uncomfortable. No need to act so dour. You killed my father, Jon replied petulantly. Why did children have to be so difficult? Lux lamented. He really didn't like dealing with children who weren't his own and figured this would be annoying. If Jon weren't a protagonist, Lux would have left the kid to fend for himself on the streets. Luckily for the little bastard, he had an interest in the innate plot armor that came with being favored by a world's will. Not quite, boy. You see, Ned Stark wasn't your father, Lux corrected, as the kid's face scrunched, full of indignation. You're lying, the prepubescent voice cried, making Lux shrug. Maybe, but why don't you let your ancestors tell you the truth, Lux said, nodding towards the weirwood. Place your hand on its face. Jon didn't move, still glaring, until Lux gave him a look that had the kid hesitantly placing a palm on the ashen bark. Again, Lux had to wait in silence until Jon staggered away from the tree after viewing the visions of his mother's dalliance with the creepy Targaryen prince. Tears ran down Jon's face, and Lux decided to give the boy a moment. As you saw, your uncle allowed you to be treated as nothing more than a lowly bastard when you should have been raised as a prince of the realm, Lux told him as Jon sniffled up his falling snot. God, children are gross. He was still my uncle, Jon sobbed, making Lux roll his eyes. Why did you show this to me? He asked. Sharing blood doesn't mean you should forgive a person's sins, boy. Serve me, and you'll never be treated as a bastard again, Lux offered, and Jon stewed in silence yet again. Well, the kid was young. Lux really shouldn't have expected him to be much of a conversationalist to begin with. So, deciding to get this talk over with, Lux once again reached into the planet's magical veins, finding the correct soul and binding it to the nearby forest while sending it enough information to know what was going on. Shortly after being summoned, the ghost of Lyanna Stark rushed towards her crying son. Of course, Jon began skedaddling away at the sight of a spooky spirit darting towards him. Lux held up a hand, lifting the boy off the ground before turning him around and forcing him to get a better look at the figure chasing him. Mother? Jon questioned, as Lyanna's ethereal hand rested on his cheek. Damn, why were the mothers of this world so fine? Lux wondered, eyeing the northern beauty's spectral form up and down. Lux cleared his throat, breaking their heartwarming reunion. I'll give you time to make your decision, boy. Until then, your mother will be bound to this area. Feel free to visit as much as you'd like, he told the emotional child before giving them their privacy, vanishing to hunt down a pair of naughty little elves. A new god's conquest. Changing out of the loose robes she normally preferred wearing around the castle, Bella looked at herself in the mirror with a smile, now dressed in tight black leather travel trousers and a matching jerkin. With her list of targets already memorized, Bella grabbed the many portkeys her master had prepared for her mission. She took the first one in hand and spoke the activation phrase aloud, instantly vanishing to her first destination. Bella wrinkled her nose at the dreary atmosphere, filled with the smell of salt and rot. After entering the castle, which was somehow even more wretched, she wondered how anyone could live in a place like this. Honestly, her target should be thanking her for taking them away from this shithole, Bella thought. But she wouldn't be hearing any gratitude for the moment as she loomed over the sleeping teenage girl, a face full of pimples. Bella would have to do something about the girl's appearance. Whether or not the Greyjoy girl would ever have the honor of pleasing her master, something so unsightly shouldn't be allowed in his divine presence. Still, she needed to keep moving and would have to deal with such things later. Instead, Bella quickly slapped a portkey on the girl's back, sending her to an inescapable chamber where the servant elves would handle looking after another one of her master's hostages, not forgetting to leave one of the messages she'd been given at the scene of the crime. Bella thought the Iron Islands had been rough during her short time there, but when she caught a whiff of the capital's air, the rank smell of shit hitting her like a bludger to the face, she wanted nothing more than to burn the filthy city off the face of the planet. Alas, she had her master's will to carry out and dared not linger. I didn't request a servant. A bitchy voice called out as Bella entered her second target's chambers. With no desire to speak to the woman she could already tell would be a complete cunt, Bella silently beamed the pregnant blonde in the back of the head with another portkey, completing her task in the vile city flawlessly, carelessly leaving a rolled-up parchment behind in the empty room. Ah, now this is much better, Bella smiled, standing in the heart of the reach as the sun shone bright and the birds merrily chirped, all while a gentle breeze carried the refreshing scent of budding flowers. Bella honestly couldn't understand why everyone yearned for that wretched Iron Throne when dealing with the constant smell of backed-up sewage came along with it. Apparating through the castle's many gardens, she finally found her third target of the day frolicking through the flowers without a care. And after confounding the nearby servants, the adorable brunette was squeaking in fright as Bella grabbed the little girl from behind. Shish, be a good girl now and come with Auntie Bella, she teased, sending the future beauty off into her master's clutches before placing a calling card on the nearby tea table and departing for her final target after stealing a tasty-looking treat from a plate as she went. Bella silently licked her lips as she merged with the shadows, intently observing the chamber's only mattress, where two young, supple bodies intertwined above silken sheets. Princess, shall I invite Andre to your chamber tomorrow as planned? The pretty teen with golden hair asked, and Bella couldn't help but listen in on the heated pillow talk. Yes, I can't wait. Let's pray he can handle the both of us, Bella's target of these sweltering lands answered with a giggle before making the blonde let out a moan as she took one of the girl's bare nipples between her seductive lips. Now, the olive-skinned teen was her only purpose for coming here, but after peeking into the girl's mind to uncover the identity of her lovely companion, Bella was sure her master wouldn't mind an extra princess tagging along. And after checking the time, Bella was pleased to find herself well ahead of schedule. Of course, she used this extra time to let the lovely scene in front of her play out to its conclusion, the princesses finally falling asleep in each other's arms after a passionate evening. Feeling her own need for release, Bella quickly napped the gorgeous girls, leaving her final message on top of the arousal-coated sheets before rushing off to beg her master to fulfill her desires. A new god's conquest. Tell me, Squid King, why shouldn't I cave in your skull for this treason and breaking your oath to the throne? Robert demanded, clearly in no mood for courtly games. I swore no oath to a Baratheon king, Balin replied, making Robert frown. It was true, but even for a man indifferent to politics, Robert knew the excuse was flimsy at best. Your Grace, giving Balin a chance to swear fealty to your name may be for the best, Jon suggested before he could do anything rash. And just before he could argue on the matter, the doors burst open, interrupting the discussions as a page hastily ran over. Your Grace, urgent news from Lannisport, the boy cried as he quickly bowed on the side. Come, hand it over, he gruffly gestured for the lad to approach. Robert unfurled the parchment and after reading the few words within, his hands trembled with rage. His wife and unborn child were abducted beneath everyone's nose. And from the message they'd left behind, the same bastard who killed his brother in arms was the person responsible. What is it, Your Grace? Jon asked, but the question hadn't even registered in Robert's mind, the letter he'd been holding falling to the ground as he eyed the kneeling Greyjoy. Unfortunately for the Lord of Pike, there was only one person in the room whom he could unleash his fury upon. And before any could react to stop him, his great hammer was already buried into the stone floor, the squid's head crushed to a pulp beneath. Read ahead on my Patreon. Link. patreon.com/CodeKingu. My Pat charges every 30 days so it doesn't matter which day of the month you join. Join my Discord. Discord. GGVP2Q8XPK4D. 5 comments 0 vote. Squire. You claim that in one night, this foreign invader abducted not one, but 4 children of the realm's great houses. The Hand questioned his maester, and Tywin felt as exasperated as the Lord of the Eyrie sounded by his tone. But more than exasperation, Tywin was holding back his seething wrath from showing on his stoic face. And looking over at their drunken king required a good part of his willpower not to show any visible annoyance. It was clear that the whoremonger cared far more about the death of the Stark Lord rather than the capture of his queen and unborn child. Tywin, on the other hand, cared not if the north burned to ashes. No, what rankled him was the complete disregard for the reputation of his house, the reputation he had painstakingly built with his own hands. The last time his house was slighted, songs were written of his retribution. This time, Tywin vowed that legends would be created. Technically, it would be 5 of the great house's children, considering her graces with child, Maester Catelyn corrected, breaking the silence. Yes, thank you for that, Tywin drawled, giving the maester a hard stare that had the bookish man shrinking into his seat. And the words seemed to send the king over the edge, Robert roaring as he threw his empty goblet through an ornate stained glass window he'd commissioned from Myr. Tywin sent the maester another look, noting he dared not meet his eyes, likely understanding that he wouldn't be living a comfortable life for the next few moons. After all, that window was a favorite of his and cost a significantly sized bag of dragons. I'll sail my fleet to the north immediately. Who knows what horrors my sweet Marjorie is suffering, the dullard, Mace Tyrell, took the moment to explain his ingenious plan. And when your army make land, what's then stopping this invader from keeping your precious daughter unharmed? Tywin asked, the oaf's round face reddening after his blunder. After that, the discussion on how to handle this matter went on for what felt like an eternity, the king falling further into his cup, his only contribution being a demand to march through the neck before his hand could calm the drunkard down. It went to show how useless this whole thing was that Tywin was close to being pleased when a scribe working under his maester entered with a letter, interrupting the back and forth between the Flower Lord and the aging hoster Tully. Your Grace, my lords, it's a message from the north, Catelyn said as he began reading. It's an invitation to what's being called a grand parley in 3 moons' time. Fuck a parley, I should be bashing their skulls in with my hammer, the king slurred before slumping over after passing out. Tywin rolled his eyes, deciding to take the lead in this debate. After all, someone competent had to if they had any hope of repelling the invaders. A new god's conquest. Olenna wrapped her fingers across the courtyard table, the 2 fools she could never tell apart nervously fidgeting at her side. Oh, out with it already, she grouched, in no mood for their trepidations. Apologies, my lady, we could find no traces left behind and none witnessed the young lady's abduction, Left explained, making her eyes narrow and brows furrow. Leaving her guards to their squirming, Olenna took a moment to let the silence stew. After learning that this mysterious new lord captured 4 hostages from the great houses in a single night, she wasn't expecting much to come from the investigation. Still, not even a single spy being weeded out was alarming. How could a plot so grand be accomplished with no assistance from within the household? Olenna believed she knew more about this foreign conqueror than any other within the 7 kingdoms, bar the spider, of course. When a new trading company showed up, undercutting the grain prices set throughout the Reach, she made it her business to gather every bit of information she could. And it didn't take a genius to link the company flying golden banners with a silver wolf head to the gold and black sigil left in the ransom letter. However, despite her concerted efforts, Olenna received nothing, not even whispers regarding this new king's name. Other than the fact his people were devoted followers of a new religion who worshipped a god named Lux Tenebris, she was left with more questions than anything. And while she hadn't underestimated these new players, she now knew her initial estimations were far from accurate. Olenna let out a sigh, left and right flinching as she continued ignoring them. While this was the greatest tragedy in House Tyrell's recent history, not all hope was lost. At the very least, she was sure no harm would come to her precious granddaughter. Only an incompetent ruler would allow the mistreatment of a valued hostage, and by the grand feats demonstrated in rapid succession, Olenna would never believe the man to be anything other than a competent lord. For now, Olenna could only keep faith that her teachings hadn't gone to waste. Marjorie was young, but Olenna hadn't slacked when teaching her the game in the slightest. Olenna just hoped that her imbecile of a son wouldn't muck everything up without her guiding hand. A new god's conquest. His eyes closed in satisfaction, Lux groaned as his newest paramour worked his manhood between his legs. Laying on her stomach, propped up by the elbows, his lover delightfully fondled his sack while swirling her nimble tongue around his bulbous tip. Fuck, Raela, you're getting better at this, he praised, and it was the truth. The former queen had been shockingly inexperienced in matters of the flesh but quickly took to it like a fish to water, or maybe like a dragon to fire would be a better phrase. Thank you, my love. I aim to please, she giggled, taking his lower head out of her mouth and moving to trail her pouty lips along his shaft. Oh, then if that's so, I have a task for you that would greatly please me, he told her, only receiving a jolt of pleasure as his Valyrian beauty hummed her agreement with half of his family jewels in her salivating mouth. As Raela continued lapping at his balls, Lux nearly forgot about what he was going to ask until the minx took his dick in hand, gently stroking as she licked along his chiseled abdominals, all the way to his protruding Adam's apple, finally reaching the side of his face as his woman gently nibbled on his earlobe. Anything, just ask, she answered, her seductive tone and the warm breath on his ear sending tingles down his spine. Lux smiled at his clearly smitten mistress, taking one of her modest tits in hand while teasing the pale nipple that matched the surrounding soft skin. The attention-starved MILF had easily fallen into his clutches at the slightest shows of affection. And she would only further become his as he continued giving her warmth she'd never imagined having, something that was easy enough for him to give when it would ensure the devotion of such an exquisite specimen. Deciding to hold off on talking for the moment, Lux leaned forward to meet those lovely lips with his own, easily invading the tasty cavity as his tongue explored without resistance. Raela's soft form melted into his embrace as their kiss deepened, her legs moving to straddle his hips and her heated core resting on the underside of his cock. He could barely hold himself back from immediately going in for the prize but decided to get their conversation back on track. I have 4 new highborn girls who need something to keep them busy while they're here. You would have my gratitude if you allow them to join the lessons you hold with Dany and Missandei, Lux explained before the grinding movements that already had his cock and balls drenched paused. Dear, what have you done now? Raela asked, and Lux could tell she was scared to hear the answer. Nothing much for you to be worried about, my sweet Raela, Lux said, slapping one of her thick cheeks that had her continuing the movements atop his cock. I've simply acquired a few hostages, he continued, chuckling after seeing the unimpressed look his lover was sending him. As I said, there's no need to worry, and everything will work out perfectly in the end, he soothed his woman, who was quite the worrier, and as she cutely nibbled her lower lip, the temptation became too great. And in the next gliding movement, Lux angled himself in a way that had him piercing his queen's pink folds, any of her worried words cut off by the cries of ecstasy. So, will you do this favor for me? And who knows, maybe Dany will make some new friends, he asked, and it took the moaning woman more than a few short moments to come to her senses. Won't they be spiteful of the situation, Raela gasped between moans, his hands gripping onto the soft hip flesh as the sound of pussy squelching filled the room, like music to his ears. Little girls can be quite the fickle bunch. I'm sure they'll forget about their grievances soon after experiencing luxuries previously thought unimaginable, Lux shrugged, not too worried about his hostage's feelings either way. The beautiful woman bouncing on his cock slapped his chest. You're such a villain, she teased before Lux made her squeal after tugging a nipple in return. Woman, you still haven't answered my question, he complained, moving a hand to toy with the beauty's crinkled asshole, her pussy walls tightening around his shaft as she gasped at the new sensation. Of course, that's a yes, my love, she agreed, squealing as one of his naughty fingers began slowly pressing into her back door. Wonderful, now how could I ever repay you? Lux questioned the woman nearly lost in lust. Perhaps, you can do that one thing with your tongue, she mumbled into his chest, her face reddening and too embarrassed to look him in the eyes. What was that? I couldn't hear you. Lux lied, his supernatural hearing easily picking up the muffled request. You heard me. She slapped his chest again, making him laugh as he sped up his thrusts. Of course, my dear, I'll gladly fulfill that request of yours, he told her, feeling the womanhood spasming around his cock before burying himself deep and painting his paramour's womb white. A new god's conquest. Oof. Sansa wheezed after getting knocked onto her ass in the training yard, an older redhead standing victorious while a timid brunette watched from the side. Perhaps it was the fate of this world's named characters, but either way, young Ygritte and Gilly somehow caught the attention of his wildling wife, the bloodthirsty woman deciding to train a few spear maidens with her free time. He gave Val a knowing smile. While Sansa had been treated more than fairly as her ward, Lux knew that a part of his woman enjoyed the insult that having a Stark child under her stewardship was to the entire North. His wife could be a spiteful bitch at times, he decided, which was why he loved aggravating her so. The angry sex afterward was always worth the consequences. What's wrong? Has the Southron lady given up so soon? Ygritte prodded as little Sansa pulled herself up by her training staff, patting the dust and dirt off her sore bum. You're 3 name days older, Sansa huffed with a cute frown. Is that so? Ygritte smirked, pretending to hum in thought. But Gilly is your age, yet she can put up twice as much of a fight. Sansa nearly growled at the teasing. Lux could tell that the pampered northern princess had a competitive streak, and while she dreaded her time learning the spear at first, she was now nearly as enthusiastic about it as Ygritte. Interrupting the bickering, Lux's first squire walked in, catching Sansa's attention as she waved with a smile, the lad waving back in turn. Despite her mother's disdain toward the supposed bastard she'd experienced growing up, Lux knew that Sansa was still happy to have a recognizable face around. Oh, late for your first scheduled training. That's not a good look, Jay, Lux scolded as the former Jon Snow looked away sheepishly. Yes, with his mother's prodding, Jon had forsaken the name given by his uncle, now going by Jaehaerys Targaryen. Lyanna Stark had been quite cross with her brother's actions, to say the least. Lux, of course, wasn't going to be using his full name, that was far too long for his taste. And sure, Lyanna didn't seem too pleased when he called her son so casually, but it's not like she could do anything about it. Apologies, my lord, Jay bowed his head with his usual bland personality, something Lux would have to fix. He didn't want to spend his time around such a boring character. Still, Lux was pleased to see his shift in attitude towards himself. After spending time with his mother's spirit, it hadn't taken long at all for the kid to sneak behind the ghostly woman's back, swearing his loyalty in return for her resurrection. Ah, don't worry kid, I know it was your mother's fussing that held you back, Lux waved the apologies off, patting the kid's shoulder and almost making him stumble at the force. Now, how about you show me what you've learned while in Winterfell? Tossing a wooden training sword over, Lux watched in amusement as the boy stood ready for a fight with the blunt blade pointed toward himself. It won't be me you'll be sparring with today, he told his squire, nodding at Ygritte. But my lord, she's a girl, Jay stated the obvious. No shit, Sherlock, but if I were you, I'd be praying for that girl to go easy on me, and those words of yours aren't helping. Lux smiled, knowing this would be entertaining while Jay furrowed his brow at the reference he didn't understand. Now get a move on, he commanded, nudging the confused kid towards the fiery little redhead. I'll hold back as much as I can, Jay said, making Lux sigh as he walked over to pull his lovely wife into his arms to watch the spar together. Oh yeah, and what makes you think that you're the one who needs to hold back? Ygritte shot back, already angered before the fight could even begin. Women are weak and meant to be protected, Jay said, and Lux winced, knowing the kid's beatdown would be particularly brutal. You know nothing, brat, Ygritte spat before readying her blunt spear. As their kitty fight went on, Jay miserably losing to no one but the kid's own surprise, Lux occasionally sent a healing light his way while nuzzling into his wife's warmth, the cries of pain and pleas of mercy going ignored. Read ahead on my Patreon. Link. Patreon.com/CodeKingu. My Pat charges every 30 days so it doesn't matter which day of the month you join. Join my Discord. Discord. GGVP2Q8XPK4D. 8 comments 0 vote. Toys. Anne. This chapter's second scene between Lux and Cersei is pretty fucked up. I'm sure you could guess where it'll be heading. Just thought I'd give a warning for once. Picking at a few magnificent dishes she'd never had the fortune of tasting before her abduction, Arianne couldn't help but steal glances at her ruggedly handsome captor between each bite. With their good behavior, Arianne, her cousin, and the Tyrell girl were given more freedoms than she'd have ever expected from the situation. And that wasn't even mentioning the luxuries nearly showered upon her by the helpful little servant creatures who were happy to attend hand and foot if treated with kindness and respect. Sure, she'd been overwhelmed by the many magical sights after being allowed out of her chambers, but luckily, an adorable elf named Leaf had been by her side, easing her into this new life. And if Arianne had anything to say about it, this would be her life for the foreseeable future. She knew the new ruler of the North had multiple lovers, surely someone of her station and beauty would be a welcomed addition. She knew her father wouldn't approve. How could the heir of Dornish settle for becoming a lowly paramour? Now, normally, she'd agree. However, everything changed when you consider that, as a man hailed a god, each of his women held more influence and power than any queen could ever hope for. It was a good thing that Lord Tenebris didn't seem likely to take her father's consideration into mind, Arianne thought. Hearing a light tinkle, Arianne turned to see the eldest princess giggling across the table, a frown forming on her flushed face. Delphi Black. Arianne had learned she was one of the king's baseborn children, a spoiled brat who enjoyed relentlessly prodding her. Yet, the circumstances of her birth mattered little, none having the nerve to wrong the king's favored daughter. She, too, did her best to avoid conflict, not wanting to risk the liberties she'd been allowed so far. Not to mention that she'd be the girl's stepmother one day, Arianne supposed, hiding a smirk. Arianne wondered what Delphi was amused by. The princess didn't seem interested in the chatter between her younger twin sisters and the fawning Marjorie by her side. Whatever, she shrugged, taking a bite of buttered lobster before glancing towards the main table once again. My daddy told me about girls like you, the previously mentioned princess spoke, distracting Arianne from ogling the man she desired as he ate. He promised to lock me up until I was 100 years old if I grew up to be such a trollop. What would a child like you know? She harumphed, unable to hold her tongue after the little brat hit her sore spot. She only hoped it wouldn't come back to bite her later. And to her dismay, Arianne noticed the devious look on the girl's face a moment too late, and before she could do anything about it, the princess was already skipping towards the head seat of the main table. Clenching the hem of her silk dress, she watched in irritation as her nemesis crawled onto her kingly father's lap, the younger girl's small arms wrapping around his masculine neck as she pulled herself up to lay a kiss on his cheek, right next to that chiseled jawline of his. Arianne knew that it was nothing more than a sweet and innocent moment between a father and his daughter, but oh how she wished to be in her place right now. Her bum seated between his strong legs, her budding breasts pressed against his wide chest, her supple lips against his hot flesh, all while enveloped by his firm embrace. So caught up in her fantasies was she, that it wasn't until Delphi moved to whisper something in her father's ear that she was brought back to reality, her face heating up, nearly matching the temperature of her womanhood, as the man she desired turned to her with a knowing smirk, the little bitch on his lap putting on the most saccharine sweet expression imaginable. Thoroughly embarrassed, Arianne spent the remainder of the night's meal with her head down, captivated by the fascinating foreign foods, and as soon as it was proper to excuse herself, she dragged her cousin by the arm, bowing towards the king, not managing to meet his beautiful eyes before leaving for her quarters with haste. Arianne, will you finally tell me what the problem is? Tyene asked as the doors slammed shut. Not answering immediately, Arianne shrugged off her dress before plopping face first onto one of the room's two large beds and screaming all her indignation into the goose-down pillows. Unsurprisingly, she felt her closest cousin joining her on the bed they shared most nights. Come now, Arianne, it can't be that bad, Tyene told her. Didn't you see what happened? Who knows what the troublesome girl said to her father? Arianne whined, turning onto her side and shaking her cousin's bare shoulders to get the point across. Are you mad, Arianne? As gilded of a cage this is, we've been imprisoned, and this is what you're worried about. Tyene sighed, and Arianne couldn't understand how her cousin hadn't realized their captor's greatness. Not to mention the thought of being ravished against her will by the powerful man, no god, filled her dreams, something she'd not be admitting, of course. Cousin, King Lux is doubtlessly the most powerful being in the world. Why would I care about such nonsense when there's a chance to stand at the side of a god walking among men? Arianne asked, only to see Tyene rolling her eyes. She knew her cousin hadn't believed in the king's claims of godhood, something Arianne couldn't understand, not with the many marvels beyond mortal means proving otherwise. Please, Tyene, I still want us to share a bed as we lose our maidenhead together. Won't you help me gain the king's favor? She begged, giving her cousin those watery eyes that always got others to fold to her whims. Fine, it's not like I can leave you to get in trouble by yourself, Tyene agreed after letting out a long breath, making Arianne squeal as she brought the girl she was as close as sisters with into a tight hug. Now come, dear cousin, let's practice for our night with the king, Arianne purred into Tyene's ear, already beginning to grope at her soft curves over the thin small clothes she wore. A new god's conquest. Cersei huffed her annoyance while waiting for her dinner's delivery. The quality of service from her captor's filthy creatures had been quite lacking these past days. Honestly, if it weren't for her lodgings being barely fit for a queen like herself, she'd have thrown a fit by now. Still, her patience was beginning to wane as she sat at the room's small table. Elf, where's my meal? She demanded, calling out to the empty air, only receiving silence in return, making her let out a growl as her stomach followed suit. I've been told that you've been treating my loyal servants rather poorly. A deep voice had Cersei jumping to her feet as fast as her bloated belly would allow in shock, the previously empty seat across from her now occupied by a man like none she'd ever seen before. I take it you're this god those useless servant creatures claim to serve? Cersei questioned after regaining her regal demeanor. HMMPH, nothing more than a mummery, she decided. My father will have the head of everyone you love on a spike as you beg for your life, she helpfully informed the man who obviously didn't know the trouble he'd gotten himself into. I'd be more worried about myself if I were you, the impudent man told her, chuckling to himself. How dare he mock her? Cersei fumed. You wouldn't dare lay a hand on a Lannister. Even an outsider of the Seven Kingdoms like yourself would have heard the reins of Castamer, she threatened, annoyed to see nothing but amusement on the bastard's attractive face. Ash, would you like to join us? Her captor called out to no one, the mongrel who hadn't shown her the respect she was due appearing at his side, a nasty smile on her small face. As the mistreated party, I thought it best for you to decide her punishment, he continued, making her gulp after realizing this lunatic held no fear for her father's reprisal. Many thanks, master, the creature she now remembered was named Ash agreed, and after the little thing snapped her fingers, Cersei felt as something wrapped around her face, forcing her mouth wide open. I believe she was expecting her meal around now. Why don't we satiate her hunger, master? Cersei heard the elf ask, her curse coming out as nothing but muffled babbles through the ring-shaped thing in her mouth. The little creature approached, and Cersei backed away until she felt the warm stone walls on her back. She didn't know what was planned for her, but she wanted no part in it. I wouldn't suggest fighting what's to come. We wouldn't wish that growing babe of yours any harm, now, would we? The elf's sickly sweet voice had her freezing, her arms instinctually wrapping around her stomach. They wouldn't dare, would they? She wondered, her question being answered as the elf held out a hand, an invisible force pressing down on her shoulders, and she only struggled against it for a moment before remembering the dreaded words. Master, as undeserving as this mortal is, would you please allow me to feed her your divine seed? The creature asked, Cersei's eyes widening in dread. Hey, I should have known you'd choose this type of punishment, the creature's master chuckled, walking to stand before her as his servant's small hands pulled the largest manhood she'd ever seen out of his unfastened trousers. If her glare could set fire, the man looking down on her kneeling form would be naught but ashes. Cersei had only graced one man the honor of using her mouth for their pleasure, and now realizing what would be happening against her will, she vowed her vengeance. Lux didn't bother looking into the bitch's mind to find out whether the tears running down Cersei's lovely face were caused by the ongoing sexual assault, or from the fact that it was likely the uppity cunt's first time having her throat so thoroughly worked in. Either way, it was a wonderful sight to behold, and her writhing tongue spasming along his shaft as her convulsing throat milked his tip had his balls churning, ready for a release. Seeing Ash's vile grin as she forced the queen's tear-covered face back and forth really had Lux wondering if the elf had always been so unhinged or if he was somehow to blame. Whatever, it wasn't like he cared enough to change the elf's mindset, not when the freaky sex was so delightful. What he did care about was the beautiful woman who didn't seem to be having an enjoyable experience at the moment. Cersei cut a truly striking visage, and Lux decided that he'd be keeping the golden-haired cunt and the incestuous daughter yet to be born for himself. But he could think about the mother-daughter pair for later. Now, he was close to blowing his load, and Ash understood his dilemma, reaching to fondle his sack while pressing Cersei forward until her lips met the base of his shaft, his cum leaking out of her nose as he drained his balls down her contracting gullet. Will that be all for her punishment, Ash? He questioned the little sadist after pulling his still rock-hard cock out of his captured queen's exquisite mouth. To answer his inquiry, Ash simply snapped her fingers, Cersei's dress disappearing as ropes shot from the walls and ceiling, binding the panting mess of a woman before neatly presenting her hovering form at crotch height, the bitch's arms tied behind her back, and legs spread wide as she glared up at him, the ring gag that was holding her mouth open now vanished. You'll pay for, Cersei began, her useless threats cut off by a cry of pain, one of her puffy pink nipples ruthlessly squeezed between a clawed hand. Beg his grace to fuck your whore cunt, Ash demanded, and after a moment of silence, his sadistic dark elf lightly traced her sharpened nails along the beautifully smooth skin of the queen's round stomach, a low whimper leaving the golden bitch's lips at the clear threat. Please, your grace, fuck this whore's cunt, she sobbed, and Lux only hoped that his newest toy hadn't broken so soon. Fortunately, his worries had been unfounded, Cersei's bitchy glare returning as he teased the cleanly shaved lips between her long and graceful legs, the head of his cock beginning to spread the surprisingly tight slit. With just his tip inside, Lux paused, stroking the side of his toy's gorgeous face. One day you'll look back on this, and you'll thank me with all your heart for making you mine, he told her, fully sheathing himself into her tight cave in one thrust as the cries Cersei tried her best to muffle echoed through the chambers. I wonder what your king would think if he knew what was being done to his woman. Lux asked, grabbing and squeezing her large tit flesh as his hips never stopped thrusting. Of course, I'm sure it's your twin brother who'd be the one most upset. Maybe I should bring him here. Tell me, whore, do you think Jaime would get off watching me rape his sister? Fuck you bastard, Cersei snarled, making him smile. Please, by all means keep running your mouth. I'll enjoy every moment as you work off your debt with this beautiful body, Lux teased, and the insult on the tip of Cersei's tongue quickly died as it seems she thought better of it for now. Master, I think she's enjoying her punishment a little too much, Ash chimed in, snapping her fingers again, the whore on his dick spinning to face the floor as the binding ropes moved. Lux gladly took the opportunity to grab a handful of her thick ass, pausing at the moan of pleasure that left the woman's mouth. I think you might be right, he agreed, looking down at the growing puddle of arousal, pussy juice gushing with each of his movements. Any suggestions? Lux asked, already having a good guess at where this was heading. I wonder if this whore of a queen is still a virgin in the one hole we haven't touched so far. Ash questioned herself, one of her small fingers circling the crinkled hole exposed to the air. Please, no, Cersei begged, and Lux could hear her tears flowing again as they trickled to the floor. Quiet, his little sadist hissed, slapping one of the bitch's hanging tits for the impertinence. Just be glad that this whore cunt of yours is providing plenty of lube for what's to come. Ash gave him a wink, and Lux saw no reason to not indulge his loyal servant as he pulled out of the gaping quim, changing his aim and piercing the virgin asshole without bothering to lower the speed of his thrust in the slightest, the pained cries of one of the characters he detested a heartwarming sound. But Lux wasn't a completely heartless bastard, he told himself, and after a few rough, and surely unpleasurable insertions, he decided that this had been enough punishment for her alternate self's actions, channeling a good amount of divine healing through his cock, the cries of pain turning to pleasure as Ash pouted on the side. And as the freshly deflowered asshole twitched in pleasure around his dick while her sopping pussy sprayed his sack, Lux was soon unloading the night's second delivery of cum into the beautiful blonde's bowels. Second AN. I need stones for motivation, so gimme all dem gems and I'll pump out another chapter much faster this time if we can get in the top 50. I know all of you have stones. Most of you never even use them. Hand them over. Read ahead on my Patreon. Link. patreon.com/CodeKingu. My Pat charges every 30 days so it doesn't matter which day of the month you join. Join my Discord. Discord. GGVP2Q8XPK4D. 6 comments 0 vote. Hannibal. Brother, you can't expect me to do nothing. He clenched the arms of his seat, the wooden joints creaking at the force. That is exactly what I expect. I will not back your ill-considered campaign, Doran answered, the way he remained so calm irritating a baron to no end. Our daughters, Doran, they have our daughters. Are we to leave them to the same fate as we had with Elia? He raged, no longer caring to hold back his barbed words. Enough, his brother shouted, and a baron knew he'd hit a sore spot by the rare outburst. You know as well as I that this is not the same. This isn't the Mad King we're dealing with, Doran continued, regaining his calm. For the time being, I'll only make decisions under the presumption that this new king of the north will treat his hostages with the respect they're due. So that's it. You'll just sit on your hands and hope for the best, a baron deadpanned, tired of how passive his brother could be. If that's how you want to put it, a baron. Then yes, I'll not risk my daughter's life with any of your foolishness. Fine, I'll take my leave then, he growled, standing and walking for the chamber's exit. And a baron, I forbid you from leaving the water gardens until we depart for the grand parley, Doran ordered before he could step out. Not bothering to respond the command, a baron only paused to nod, closing the door on his way out with more force than necessary, heading for his quarters where the others waited for answers. My love, has your brother come to a decision? His paramour asked, and he let out a long sigh, his lover and 2 older daughters frowning at his response. He's not going to help me get them back, and I've been forbidden from leaving, a baron told them, his oldest growling before punching the stone wall while Ellaria moved to wrap her arms around his waist. Well, if you can't leave, Obara and I will go, his daughter who wasn't still working her frustrations out on the innocent wall suggested, making said daughter pause her violence, apparently interested in the idea. Absolutely not. It's far too dangerous. He flat out rejected the idea as Nymeria rolled her eyes and Obara scowled. Yet you'd do the same if you could, she accused. Okay, she was right, but that didn't mean he wanted his daughters to go gallivanting across the continent into enemy territory. I don't think you'll be able to stop them, my love. They're as stubborn as their father, Elaria said, running a hand along his neck. I'll accompany them and keep them from doing anything too reckless. A baron broke away from his woman's embrace, pacing around the room as he thought the idea over. It could work. He knew that Braavos was the primary trading partner of the new Northern King, and he had plenty of contacts in the Free City who could smuggle his girls without anyone the wiser. All right, but you're not going there to start a war. If you can't rescue Arianne and Tyene without a fight, I only want you gathering information, he decided. A new god's conquest. Lux's 4 black gold appendages that he usually kept hidden away carried him over the smoking waters and volcanic ruins of the greatest civilization this world had ever witnessed. It felt good getting out of his castle, spreading his wings literally and metaphorically. Lux would never pretend like he wasn't the laziest bastard around, but even he could enjoy the occasional adventure. However, he hadn't decided to waste his time visiting the flaming pits of Valyria for fun alone. With the grand parley he'd scheduled taking place in a couple of months, Lux was hoping to pick up a few things here that would have the southern lords shitting their trousers when he made his arrival. You see, Lux could show up with his flying armada equipped with enough firepower to wipe out King's Landing in a short barrage, but the unsophisticated inhabitants of this world would only marvel at the fact for a short while before believing they somehow stood a chance against his might. So, no, while he loved his badass fleet, it wouldn't send the right message he was looking for. After all, he wanted to thoroughly cow the remaining half of Westeros not under his rule. Because if a full-scale war broke out, he'd easily take over the continent, and Lux wasn't nearly done playing with his toys yet. And who knows, maybe he'd even leave the conquest of Westeros to one of his precious daughters. Now, back to why he was flying over these apocalyptic lands. If he wanted the upcoming negotiations to end in a cold war of sorts, he'd need something that'd truly have the lords trembling in their boots. So, dragons were on his shopping list, specifically, any eggs lucky enough to survive through the doom. But Lux wouldn't be settling for the dragons of this world. He felt dirty just referring to them as dragons. At most, they could be considered wyverns, and he wouldn't be caught dead riding such an inferior creature. He shuddered just thinking about it. Any egg he'd find would simply be used as a starting point, and while he knew that he wasn't strong enough to evolve them to the levels of true dragons, he'd at least make sure they had 4 legs. Finished with his rant, Lux spread his senses, looking for anything with the barest hint of magic. And while he'd picked up on multiple signals buried under ash and molten rock, he'd leave the digging for later because something far more interesting was happening a dozen or so miles to the east, not far from where the capital of the freehold should be. Flapping his wings, Lux raced through the smoke-filled skies, easily reaching speeds faster than sound, but with his magic canceling any effect on the air, he silently appeared above an ongoing battle, the expected shockwaves from such movements non-existent. Lux grinned, happy to find something he hadn't expected. Something that was more than welcomed as he neared omniscience each day. On one side, he watched as red slithering creatures swarmed their foe, breathing fire that harmlessly rolled over the behemoth, who seemed completely unbothered as he munched on their kin. A dragon. And from the histories, Lux knew that, while the grade scales didn't match the description, this should be none other than the infamous cannibal. Even in its decrepit old age, the ancient beast's wings so torn apart that it was impossible to soar the skies, it was clear that this beast still reigned supreme at the top of the food chain. Lux wanted him. If he was going to get himself a pet dragon, then he'd surely be picking the baddest motherfucker available. Cannibal, your new master has arrived, Lux proclaimed after falling from the sky in a meteoric landing that he'd like to think would have gotten a streak of perfect 10s if any judges were around to see it. As for the bus-length fireworm he was standing on, well, it's not like the corpse would be giving its opinion anytime soon. Unsurprisingly, the scaled monster only gave him a passing glance before returning to munching on the inferior reptiles. How rude. Lux decided he'd have to teach his future mount a lesson for the disrespect. But first, he'd get rid of the nearby annoyances. Creating a light spear in each hand, Lux aimed for the nearest fireworm, the golden construct pinning the thing to a boulder as the superheated spike boiled it alive. After impaling a few more of their brethren, the worms finally decided to take him into consideration instead of solely focusing on their castle-sized enemy whom they'd wrongly assumed to be the primary threat. Quickly correcting their mistake, Lux was beginning to wonder if these things had some sort of hive mind after they evenly split their focus, half now slithering towards his unmoved position on top of his first kill in unison. To get this over with, tens of golden runic circles formed at Lux's back before machine gunning the rushing horde in a spray of light bullets, any of the surviving creatures fleeing at their top speed as they tunneled away from an undefeatable opponent. And probably sensing something went wrong, the other half of the WYRM army swarming cannibal tucked tail and ran themselves as well, leaving behind piles of bodies that the old dragon merrily went about gulping down. Are ya just gonna sit there and ignore me, ya fat pig? Lux asked, his all-speak getting the meaning across, making the big oaf drop the piece of meat in his mouth as he turned, narrowing his eyes. It seems that these dragons are at least smart enough to know when they're being insulted, Lux thought, watching a wave of green flames bounce off his light barrier. Hey, this could have been easy for you, but now I'll have to teach you who's the boss here. Lux said, cracking his knuckles as he walked through the torrents of fire. Lux sent a palm strike onto the ground in front of the beast, the attack doing nothing other than leaving a hand-sized indent in the rock and confusing the dragon he was fighting. Though, Cannibal's unspoken question was soon answered, a golden projection of Lux's hand the size of a small mountain crashing onto his target's neck as he struggled underneath the immeasurable weight. With the dragon still pinned down, Lux walked up to one of its eyes, the slit pupil the height of an average man glaring him down. See, it's nothing personal, just had to establish the hierarchy, he told the angry reptile. Running his hand over the gray, cracked scales, Lux shook his head. This wouldn't do. Like he'd mentioned, he wouldn't be settling for the dragons of this world that should truly only be called wyverns. If he had a dragon egg, Lux could simply feed it his magic while making changes as he wished, but for the ancient thing in front of him, he'd have to handle it another way. There were many options that Lux had to choose from, but the one that'd have the best effect was making the dragon into his familiar. The only issue being that Nor was sure to be a pain, thinking there would be an extra soul-bound companion vying for his affection. Whatever, he'd just need to give the little pup some extra head pats, Lux decided, getting to work on the ritual while Cannibal growled his dissatisfaction at still being immobilized by the magical hand. With the two of them at the center, Lux transfigured the surroundings into a perfectly flat surface before getting to work on creating miles worth of runic trenches that would have taken months if not for his ludicrous magic reserves. Normally, a familiar ritual was a simple process, but that was only when you weren't planning on evolving the creature into a higher life form. So, Lux took his time, making sure everything was perfect. After all, the slightest mistake would probably have the big guy over here exploding into a shower of gore. Luckily for Cannibal, Lux was more than confident in his abilities, and after making a slice on his palm, and one on his soon-to-be familiar, rivers of blood flowed out of each cut. Just typical magic bullshit at work, filling the circle's channels before the smog-covered sky shined bright as the ritual activated. Seeing that the time was about right, Lux dismissed the hand-holding Cannibal to the ground, and before the disheveled dragon could act on his grievances, the ground split, oceans of magma rising from the planet's core, all converging on the creature having a terrible day. Now, where there was once a wrathful beast, only a giant sphere of hardened lava remained. Lux clapped his hands clean. Well, this might take some time. Might as well go hunt down some eggs while waiting, he thought. Later, after Lux tossed the 16th petrified egg into his storage ring, something he'd created after improving on the Wizarding World's expansion charms, he felt it was about time that his Pokemon egg hatched. After making sure his newest piece of loot was secured alongside the others of its kind and a large pile of Valyrian steel, he tore through space, appearing at the same time cracks began forming on the enormous sphere. He had no use for the slightly sharper than normal metal, but to the locals of Planetos, it was all the rage. Hell, gifting a Valyrian sword to each of the northern lords would probably have them forgiving him for the deaths he'd caused during his day-long conquest. Lux would decide what to do with the metal later. Because now, his newest companion was announcing himself to the world in a grand and over-the-top way that Lux felt was a bit much. Cannibal's head was the first thing to break free, his reinvigorate pitch-black maw roaring his presence, a jet of gold flames with black swirls lighting the skies ablaze, and Lux noted that the dragon's eyes had taken on a matching color scheme, something that was obviously caused by the ritual. After the flamboyant display, his newly created front legs and claws helped the big guy wrench the rest of himself free, Cannibal now proudly standing on 4 legs like a real dragon should. And it seems like that fact might have gone to its head as Lux felt it giving him a clearly challenging eye. How many times do I have to teach you this lesson, old man? Lux shook his head, not expecting an answer as he readied himself to lay down another whooping. So, that's exactly what Lux did, and now patting his dragon's snout, he tried comforting his beaten and bruised buddy. There, maybe in a few hundred years you might be able to put up a challenge, he lied. But I almost forgot. I can't have you using that same old unpleasant name, Lux said, pacing around while thinking. Got it, you'll be Hannibal from now on. Han for short, he told the newly named Han. Hey, Lux had already admitted he wasn't original when it came to naming. Read ahead on my Patreon. Link. patreon.com/CodeKingu. My Pat charges every 30 days, so it doesn't matter which day of the month you join. My Pat also required Discord to view content, so if that's something you don't want to deal with, join my Subscribe Star. Link. subscribestar.com/CodeKingu. Join my Discord. Discord. GGVP2Q8XPK4D. 6 comments 0 vote. Apprentice. Melisandre rode out of the island's dreary castle surrounded by the mounted guards she'd been given command over, ready to carry out the mission assigned to her by her lord. It had taken her more effort than she thought to get to this point. Another sign that the Great Other's taint had already spread far and wide. She'd been denied an audience with the Lady of Dragonstone by the guards on her first attempt, but Melisandre was well versed in using her womanly wiles to achieve her goals. The men at arms didn't stand a chance against her seductions, and she soon had the unattractive Florent woman's ear. Celise was a simple woman. Exhausted from her recent childbirth, Melisandre easily guided her into the light of R'hllor after curing her frailties, the efforts of her fellows in Volantis making the Lord's power flow through her like never before. And now, she was heading to complete the simple task of rooting out the evil that she'd noticed upon her first arrival. If Melisandre had it her way, the whole port town would burn in her lord's loving flames. Sadly, she couldn't go that far just yet and would have to settle for removing the false religion from these lands as her first step. As her first target, Melisandre entered a shabby tavern, the busiest gathering spot the town held, and with her guards following behind, the noisy chatter immediately died as the room's eyes turned to the strangers. It was a common occurrence with such small folk. They didn't dare speak up in the presence of the armed guards who could take them to task with only the slightest of perceived affronts. "My good people, who among you worships the Lord of Light, R'hllor?" she asked with a smile, the tavern's occupants remaining quiet. "Milady, I thought the Lord of Light was called Lux Tenebris." A young servant girl broke the silence, an older woman rushing over too late to cover her mouth. Melisandre grinned. This was what she was looking for. There would need to be an example set to weed out the vile religion, root and stem. "Seize the possessed child," she ordered, a few larger men, likely sailors, getting to their feet. "She will bring naught but death and ruin," Melisandre continued, the drawn steel of her guards doing more to dissuade the disobedient ones than anything as too moved to drag the girl over. "My child, the Great Other has a tainted hold over you that can only be purged in R'hllor's flames," she told the girl, her scrawny body shaking like a leaf as those nearby let out audible gasps. With haste, Melisandre commanded a pyre built on the open grounds outside the tavern, the angry onlookers following as the wailing girl kicked and clawed all along the way. And as the pyre's kindling lit, Melisandre turned to the gathered crowd, pleased to see the odd expressions on their faces, as was only proper. "Praise the Lord, His grace smiles upon us," a woman shouted, tears of reverence flowing down her face. "Yes, everything was going as planned. Lord Lux defends us from this witch," another voice sounded. "Wait, that wasn't right," she frowned, turning back to look at the girl who should have been burning in her lord's flames, only now realizing that she'd not heard any of the expected agonized wails. Melisandre gasped, the beautiful flames of her lord now a sickly, transparent black, the heretic girl looking around in surprise as the unholy fire harmlessly surrounded her small body. And even though she used every bit of her heightened magical prowess to purge the invading evil, it was all in vain, the comforting presence of her lord waning as wicked embers spread. "Lord, we beseech you, give us the strength to rid your lands of this red witch," a peasant cried, knocking her out of her shocked despair. Whipping back to the deranged crowd, the blood drained from her face. "No, no, 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 no," she stammered, a horde of horrifying, abyssal black eyes staring into her soul. "Death to the witch. Lord Tenebris is with us. Burn the false prophet." Melisandre didn't know what to do. It was the first time she'd felt abandoned by her lord, and the slowly backing away guards that had been at her side didn't seem to have a clue either. But it didn't look like she'd be getting any further time to contemplate the situation as the possessed mob rushed forward, latching onto her limbs with strength beyond what should be possible. The demons dragged and dragged, slowly inching her closer to the flames that lacked the usual soothing warmth, and despite her struggling, her efforts only had her blessed pendant falling off in the commotion, her true wrinkled form exposed as the cries of "witch" intensified. "Please, let me go." She couldn't help begging as the dark flames licked at her clothes, the false Lord of Light followers unharmed while she experienced a deep, agonizing pain like never before. Yet her pleas went unheard, and as she felt her mind fracturing from the pain, Melisandre could only comfort herself by the fact that her soul would soon be within the loving grasp of her lord, R'hllor, only that wasn't the case, and she panicked feeling dark, slimy tentacles ripping her away from her rightful place beside her lord, her being now held in the hands of a black and gold-haired man with a cold smirk on his handsome face, which was surely a disguise to hide his rotten appearance. "It'll be fun breaking you in," were the last words Melisandre heard before losing her sight. A new god's conquest. Bella popped into the cell of their other unruly hostage, the ugly duckling occupying the room, startling at the sudden interruption. While her master was handling the Lannister bitch, he'd given her the honor of taming the Greyjoy girl. "Looks like I've interrupted something rather interesting," Bella giggled, finding Asha on the cell's rock-hard mattress, quickly pulling her dampened fingers out of a pair of simple linen trousers that she'd been given. "Fucking bitch, knock or something. Better yet, let me the hell out of here," Asha growled, fixing her clothes. "Lucky for you, it's likely that your wish will be granted today, with some conditions, of course," Bella informed the grumpy girl. "Shove ya conditions up her ass, I'll get out of here myself if I have to," Asha claimed, and Bella rolled her eyes, not minding the incessant barbed words. She'd simply remember the insults while putting Asha through the hellish training she had planned. Honestly, the girl's temper had drastically calmed over the days. On her earlier visits, Asha would try attacking like a disheveled alley cat, only to be frozen in place by a quick spell. And each time, one of her cell's amenities had been taken away as a form of discipline, leaving it as the nearly bare room that it was at present. "From today, you'll be my apprentice. Know that from now on, I expect nothing less than absolute obedience," Bella told her, pretending not to have heard her earlier protest. "And when did I fucking agree to this?" Asha asked, clearly not understanding the point she'd made about obedience. For her apprentice's first offense, Bella decided to be a bit lenient, sending a weak stinging hex at the girl's left tit, receiving an indignant squawk for her impeccable aim. "Girl, be thankful that I've taken a liking to you. You remind me of my younger self." Asha went to speak, likely about to give another scathing reply. But before she could get a word out, Bella menacingly pointed towards her other tit, making the girl quickly close her mouth, apparently thinking better of it. "Now come along, we've got a ritual to get to if you want any chance of becoming mildly proficient with magic," Bella said, watching in amusement as Asha's eyes shone with clear greed for power. It was obvious that the girl would use anything that Bella decided to teach in an effort of betrayal, but breaking a new pet into obedience was half the fun, at least that was what her master had told her. Her master was right though, with her precious daughters growing up and spending time with new friends, Bella could use something like this to fill her free time. Of course, she'd tried convincing her master to bless her with another child. Sadly, he told her to wait a few decades for that. So, Asha here would be her plaything in the meantime. Grabbing the power-hungry girl by the arm while she was likely fantasizing about killing her way to freedom, Bella apparated them into the large ritual room she had prepared, 49 naked men turning to the disturbance, 7 groups of 7, each group locked within invisible barriers, runic carvings beneath their feet, all surrounding a plain stone slab. Human sacrifice was the best choice for the plans Bella had with her apprentice. It was a good thing there were plenty of wildling prisoners who couldn't adapt to her master's commandments, she thought. What the fuck is going on?" Asha spluttered, obviously more than a little apprehensive about this whole thing. "Nothing to worry about, dear. Like I said, just a little ritual to get you up to par with the rest of us," Bella consoled, and for whatever reason, her words didn't seem to lessen the girl's worries much. Shrugging, Bella waved her hand, silver chains shooting out of the stone slab and dragging a shrieking Asha onto its cold surface, the girl's arms now bound above her head and legs spread apart. Please, don't sacrifice me," Asha cried, making Bella smirk at the girl's crumbling facade. Bella wouldn't fault the girl. At that age, she didn't think she'd be doing much better either. "Shish, I wouldn't sacrifice my apprentice. That would be so wasteful," Bella said, laying a hand on the girl's stomach, her comforting gesture doing nothing but increasing her terrified shivers. "Fine, be like that," she frowned, snapping her fingers before the ill-mannered girl's clothes vanished, chains rattling as Asha tried covering herself to no effect. Bella's face scrunched at the nude form laid bare. "While the natural look can work for some, that doesn't seem to be the case for you, my dear. At the very least, you've kept yourself clean. Worry not, I'll just go ahead and take care of that before we get to business," she told her speechless apprentice, casting a simple charm that had every shred of bodily hair disappearing in an instant, goosebumps forming on her now smooth pale flesh. What did you do? Where are my clothes?" Asha spluttered, and Bella decided to ignore the useless questions as she traced lithe fingers along the too skinny body. "Plenty of work will need to be done, but you at least have something going for you," Bella drawled, moving her hand to the girl's lower half. Did you know that you have a very pretty pussy, girl? She asked. Any words from the girl cut off by a low moan as she reached the small nub at the top of a neat slit. I know I interrupted earlier. It would be rude if I don't help finish what was left off, Bella purred, inserting a finger into the tight hole that had the bound girl bucking her hips into Bella's movements. Such a slut. I wonder if you've remembered that we have an audience, Bella teased while curling her inserted finger, toying the rougher patch of skin to her apprentice's pleasure, the girl doing her best to muffle her moans. Look at them. They can't keep their eyes off of you, Bella continued prodding, the girl shuddering one last time before drenching her hand in the previously dry stone. Oh, quite the exhibitionist, aren't you? Bella said, cleaning the feminine ejaculate off her hand and slab with a wave. Of course, I only allowed these men to witness such a scene considering they'll be shriveled corpses in a moment. After today, as my apprentice, you'll belong to my master. Fuck you and your horsin' of a master, if ya think an Ironborn can be owned, Asha spat after regaining control her heaving breaths and, apparently, some of that audacity. Bella scowled, roughly pinching the panting teen's engorged clit between her thumb and index finger before channeling a wandless cruciatous curse that had the little bitch writhing and wailing in agony. Bella could get her revenge slowly over time for the insults to her person, but those aimed towards her master would have to be punished immediately and harshly. I hope you've understood your mistake, Bella asked, gently wiping away the tears running down the girl's whimpering face. Sure that her apprentice received the message, Bella left the ritual circle, activating the runes once clear, watching as the engraved pathways blazed, the 49 sacrifices howling in pain as their skin cracked and shriveled, the purified essence of their souls flowing in unison towards the struggling girl at the center. With the ritual infusing her apprentice with the magical potential she'd lacked, Bella guided any excess energies to mold the less than attractive fleshy body into something she knew her master would appreciate. As Bella worked, Asha's pimpled face cleared, her sharp nose becoming a cute button while her short raven hair now glistened after the enhancements. Moving on from the face, the girl's flat, yet somehow flabby, tits formed into a perky pair that remained only half a handful in size. Bella knew that her master appreciated all sizes and saw no reason to have her apprentice wasting time regaining her balance when it wasn't necessary. Finally, the long legs that were already somewhat attractive further filled out, giving her a nice bubbly butt that was sure to grab her master's attention. Just as Bella finished putting the final touches on her masterpiece, the circle dimmed and she appeared next to her finished product, the withered sacrifices falling to the ground, forgotten. Bella nodded her satisfaction. Her master would surely be pleased, she thought, sending the unconscious girl off to one of the castle's nicer rooms before leaving the mess she'd created for someone else while she went to check on her daughters. A new god's conquest. Nor sauntered into the new courtyard that had been built for her father's most recent stray, a herd of plump sheep cowering in the corner as the big stupid dragon snored atop a pile of burnt bones. Hey, fatty, wake up, she called out, one of his eyes opening before the imbecile snorted, ignoring her and returning to its sleep. Nor cutely growled, how dare this dummy ignore her great self, she thought, running up to its ear to give the loud a piece of her mind. Listen here, I've only decided to grace you with my presence to inform you of your position. First, it's me, my sister, and pops up here, Nor gestured above her head. Then there's the luscious grass that I relieve myself upon, she lowered her paw. After that, there are the servants who have the honor of cleaning up after myself, she again lowered her paw. And then, there's finally you, Nor told it like it was, pointing to the ground. And of course, the dumb dragon still didn't seem to understand its position, its spiked tail whipping around, attempting to bat her away. HMPH, Nor huffed, meeting the attack with a single one of her mighty paws, the large tail doing nothing but stirring up some dust. She really didn't want to do this, unfortunately it seemed like it'd be necessary, she decided, quickly growing to match before surpassing the dragon's colossal size. Nor smirked at the big dummy's stunned eyes. She much preferred her small and adorable form, but needs must, she supposed, ready to lay out a beating. A new god's conquest. Poor Hannibal, Lux thought. Maybe he'd take the big guy to burn down a village or two. You know, to get some of that confidence his dragon had surely lost. Give stones. Read ahead on my Patreon. Link. patreon.com/CodeKingu. My Pat charges every 30 days so it doesn't matter which day of the month you join. My Pat also required Discord to view content, so if that's something you don't want to deal with, join my Subscribe Star. Link. subscribestar.com/CodeKingu. Join my Discord. Discord. GGVP2Q8XPK4D. 8 comments 0 vote. Chapter 32. Machinations. Disclaimer. I own nothing but my original characters and works. All other characters and worlds belong to their respective owners. Arm in arm, Arianne walked through the courtyard beside her cousin as butterflies filled her belly. Today would absolutely be the day they'd make their move, she promised herself, her nervous excitement only growing as they neared the king's pavilion, and the heat between her legs a constant after the dreams she'd woken up from. Hiding her determination behind a coy smile as they neared, Arianne gently squeezed Tyenne's hand, receiving a little boost of confidence at the returned gesture, something that was sorely appreciated as their handsome target turned his beautiful eyes to them. It truly took all she had, but Arianne somehow managed to hold the king's gaze, seductively batting her eyelashes before giving a curtsy that surely allowed the man she favored a generous view of her still developing bust. This would be the moment of truth. Would all the hard work they'd put in these past few days pay off? Arianne knew that her cousin had her doubts. Why would King Lux give us his attention while already surrounded by numerous beauties? We're nothing more than hostages. Tyene had expressed her doubts, but she herself wouldn't give up hope. She was sure that a man as magnificent as Lux Tenebris had plenty of space in his heart for even more lovers. Ah, my Dornish princesses, what can I do for you on this beautiful day? His Grace asked, knocking Arianne from the many thoughts and worries racing through her mind, the word might he'd used putting a blush on her face she couldn't prevent. Good afternoon, Your Grace. Would you care to accompany us on a stroll through your splendid gardens? Arianne nearly stammered out while fidgeting with the edges of her dress, the request coming out stiffer than she'd have liked. You would truly honor us, Your Grace, Tyene added, playing her part even while skeptical of this whole thing. Now, how could I deny the request of such lovely ladies? The king answered with a charming smile that sent Arianne's heart fluttering. Come, take my hand, the both of you, he ordered, and she obeyed without hesitation, Tyene following along shortly after. And before Arianne even knew it, the sight before her eyes changed as she now found herself in a completely different location, yet still clutching onto the strong hand with her cousin at her side. Gods, she knew that she'd entered a magical realm ever since her abduction, but it was now truly hitting her at the first-hand experience. Not forgetting her goal in the face of the display of powerful sorcery, Arianne took the opportunity to hold onto the king's arm in hers, and, hopefully, he'd enjoy the feeling of her silk-covered mounds pressed against his chiseled muscles. And seeing him aim a gentle smile down at her, she decided it had been a good move. Forgive me for our lack of interaction so far. As you can probably guess, there are oftentimes too many vying for my attention these days, His Grace sighed, shaking his head. But those are simply excuses, we're here now, so tell me, has your stay been a pleasant one? He asked while Arianne focused on sneakily inching her soft body ever so closer to the king's own. Fortunately, she'd been paying enough attention not to miss the question. Your Grace, Arianne began before getting cut off. Please, my dears, feel free to call me Lux while it's only the three of us, the king kindly offered, and Arianne could see the surprise in her cousin's eyes. It seemed her closest companion still doubted King Lux's magnanimity. Thank you, Lux, she corrected herself. I can only speak for myself, but I've enjoyed this short time spent in your impressive castle with all my heart, Arianne finished, flashing her big, watery eyes up at her attractive king. I'd have to agree with my cousin, Lux. This has been such a wonderful experience. If there's anything at all we could do for you, please, just say the word, Tyene said, outright purring the last sentence while resting a gentle hand against the king's forearm. Damn, why hadn't she thought of saying something like that, Arianne internally lamented. Arianne felt the deep vibrations as the king chuckled. If I had to guess, I'd say subtlety is definitely not the two of yours strongest traits, he continued lightly laughing as she stood frozen, her schemes falling to pieces. I'm sorry my ladies, but we could never be, the man she'd fallen for told them, her dreams shattering. Is that what you thought I'd say? He asked, stopping her from falling into despair for the moment. Girls, how about we quit the games? The king's words had her eyes lighting up, and with the snap of his fingers, a bed large enough for three appeared in the flower-filled field. Don't worry about privacy. No one will be bothering us anytime soon, Lux said, his sexy grin sending shivers to her core. Giving Tyene a smug look, Arianne hurried over to the magically appeared mattress, sensually draping herself across the sheets while teasing off a few of her dress's straps, slowly running a hand along her now exposed thighs as her partner in crime moved to join her. Ha! She knew her charms wouldn't disappoint, and she wouldn't allow her doubting cousin to live this one down. With the girl she considered a sister at her side, Arianne bit her lower lip watching the king move towards the bed, a piece of clothing falling from his superb frame with each step, and finally he stood before them, completely bare, and she could feel herself getting dizzy while roaming her eyes along the perfect male figure in front of her, actually needing to hold onto her cousin's arm when her eyes locked onto the manhood between his legs. First, Show me how far you've gone with each other, King Lux told them, the words dragging Arianne away from her admiration, her face going redder than it already was at being called out for their intimate time together. But she wouldn't falter now that she'd gotten this far. Mustering up as much daringness as she could, Arianne pushed Tyene onto her back, her lips pressing against her surprised cousins as she hoped this display was satisfying enough for the king watching. To her joy, as she toyed with the familiar body below, for the first time, she felt the touch of a man on her most intimate parts, the king's hands roaming from her bare toes, eventually slipping underneath her loose dress. Arianne moaned into her cousin's mouth, and too caught up in the moment, it wasn't until she felt a gentle breeze on her exposé flesh that she noticed both her and Tyene were now completely nude, their dresses vanishing into thin air. She realized that with her current position, there was nothing stopping the man playing with her body from seeing her in her entirety, which did nothing but make her all the more eager for what was about to come. And as Arianne felt the large fleshy appendage splitting her virgin lower lips, she could only thank her lucky stars that she'd been abducted before nearly giving away her maidenhead to a lesser man. Letting out a satisfied sigh as the wonderful feeling of sliding into a young, virgin pussy washed over his body, Lux once again realized how fucking amazing it was to be himself. As much as he loved sleeping with his experienced women, he didn't think he'd ever get tired of taking a girl's first time. There was just something so primal and empowering about it, something even a god like himself couldn't quite put into words. Of course, there was no blood to mark the special occasion, the princess's experimentations long since handling the matter, but Lux was sure that the happy accident only made the horny Dornish girl's first time taking a man's dick all the better. You must have known what giving yourself to me like this meant, isn't that right, my sweet Arianne? Lux asked, slowly pumping in and out of the tight hole, not wanting to send the girl into a pleasure coma just yet. NNMM, I wouldn't have it any other way. I'm yours, body and soul, Arianne declared with a moan, making him smile while running a hand along his young princess's midsection, enjoying the feel of the few extra pounds of tender baby fat she'd not grown out of yet. It seemed Arianne truly embodied the passionate Dornish woman stereotype, and, honestly, Lux wouldn't have it any other way. Good, I wouldn't want there to be any misunderstandings in the future. You must understand, once I take a woman into my bed, I become quite possessive, he told his newest lover before trailing his lips from tailbone to the nape of her neck, his inexperienced princess letting out whimpers of pleasure at the new sensations. However, I wonder if your cousin is of the same mind. Lux asked, looking into the beautiful blue eyes staring up at him. I thought you two might have forgotten about me down here, Tyene sighed as Arianne leaned down, nipping the edges of the blonde's jaw. For better or for worse, I'll accompany Arianne wherever she goes. You won't regret this, sister. Lux will treat us well, won't he? Arianne asked, cheekily smiling back at him, and Lux took the moment to speed up his thrusts, the princess's arrogance gone as she screamed in ecstasy around his shaft. Hey, you're not wrong. Everything's so much simpler when the women in my life are kept happy. Even more so when I leave them in a convulsing mess of sweat and cum, Lux agreed, feeling the girl-soaked quim squeezing him at the crass words. Unsurprisingly, his Dornish princess had a naughty side to her. But as much fun as he was having with Arianne, how could he leave out the just as lovely Tyene from all the fun? So, gathering up the beautiful, long and dark wavy hair in one hand, his other spreading the marvelously purred-ass cheeks, Lux channeled just enough of his essence to be sure that the beauty taking his rod would be pushed over the edge, watching as the girl's pussy gripped his cock with all the strength it contained while the pretty rosebud twitched, unprotected from his viewing pleasure. Unable to contain herself from the divine fucking, his olive-skinned princess jolted, reaching her climax while, at the same time, soaking the pale legs and pink slit below in a spray of glistening arousal. And physically exhausted after the ordeal, the fucked silly girl would have fallen face first onto her cousin if Lux hadn't caught her, his cock exiting with a squelch, menacingly plopping onto the blonde's smooth stomach, her face flushed red. Well, princess, ready for your turn? Lux asked, only receiving a hesitant nod, the girl probably a little worried after seeing what he'd just done to her cousin. A new god's conquest. Walking through the Red Temple's entranceway by his king's side, Willem wondered how things had gotten to the point of forsaking the vows he'd sworn. Not only his vows of knighthood, but the vow he swore to his queen on her deathbed. After all, he'd already lost one of his charges, and now he was watching as his only remaining made a deal with the devil. Willem only hoped Queen Raela had it in her heart to forgive him in the afterlife. King Viserys, Esserdary, R'hllor welcomes you into his halls, a feminine voice that Willem didn't like the sound of echoed through the grand chamber they'd entered after being led down multiple flame-lit corridors. You stand before Viserys of the House Targaryen, the third of his name, King of the Andals, the Rhoynar, and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms and Protector of the Realm, Willem announced, performing his duty despite his apprehensions. Indeed I am, and I hope that your journey here was a pleasant one, your grace, the woman responded, the mocking tone making him frown, and looking over, it seemed that his young king hadn't picked up on the slight. You have us at a loss, my lady. What should we call you? Willem asked, seeing as his king didn't seem eager to begin the conversation. This one is called Kinvera, a high priestess blessed by R'hllor's grace, the woman replied, Viserys seemingly disinterested as he looked around the opulent room. TCH, my birthright was promised, yet I'm still to understand how your little order of fire worshippers will accomplish such a feat, his king prodded, and if Willem wasn't a veteran when it came to courtly matters, he didn't think he'd be able to stop himself from rubbing his brows in irritation at the lack of tact his charge displayed. He too, was skeptical about the priestess's claims, and wouldn't want to be here if he wasn't forced to accompany his desperate king, but to insult a religion in their place of power. Willem cursed himself for not being a more competent instructor. Through R'hllor's guidance, the Iron Throne will be yours, Kinvera claimed, her expression now as frosty as the winds beyond the wall. But you've had a long journey. For now, my servants will lead you to your chambers where you can get proper rest. Willem listened to his king huff at the dismissal, but deciding not to let things get too heated, he laid a calming hand on the young man's shoulder, thankful that Viserys was in a good enough mood to listen to his unspoken advice. Kinvera scowled watching the back of the petulant beggar king and his guard being led to their assigned chamber by a servant. Oh, how it aggravated her so, to allow such heretics into these hallowed halls, but, in the end, it was a necessary sacrifice that had to be made. Everything was going along with her lord's will, she consoled herself. A new god's conquest. Lux waited for his invited guests in the new tower he'd ordered constructed, its sole purpose being the housing and care of his future dragon hatchlings. He'd already gone about infusing the eggs with his magic and divinity, creating a new species that closely resembled what he'd turned Hannibal into. Now, the 16 unborn dragons could accept a familiar bond without all the hassle he'd needed to go through in Valyria. Not kept waiting for long, the first to arrive opened the doors, his squire entering with a bow while his mother trailed behind with a scowl on her pretty face. Lux, of course, knew why the young northern mother was acting all pissy. She'd come begging for her silver prince's resurrection, a request that he'd obviously shot down, choosing to deal with the woman's attitude over having some weirdo lurking around his home. Raela on the other hand, had asked the same, but a few honeyed words had the woman agreeing with the current situation. He'd told her that Viserys was troubled like his father and the harsh reality of the world would do him good. Lux only had to promise that he'd keep the little shit alive to soothe his lover's worries, a task that wouldn't even be a hassle. And speaking of Raela, the Targaryen matriarch took the moment to enter, a shock of silver hair peeking out from behind the back of her dress. Gee, good morning, father, young Dany shyly greeted after her mother pushed her forward, making him smile before ruffling the little cutie's braided hair. So yeah, Raela talked him into recognizing her precious daughter as one of his own, likely as the Targaryen MILF's last effort to keep the girl out of his vile grasp. The former queen wasn't a dumb woman. Lux knew that his mistress had long since realized the wording he'd used in the heat of the moment, his promise not to pursue Daenerys pretty vague with plenty of loopholes. Still, Lux had no problem going along with his beauty's schemes. Not that such a move would do anything to stop him from adding a matured Daenerys Stormborn to his ever-growing harem. But by that point, he doubted Raela would even mind that fact. Alright, now that everyone's here. I have gifts for you all, well most of you. I don't remember inviting one of you, Lux said, pointing a look towards a sneering Lyanna Stark. I apologize, my lord, Jaehaerys bowed again. It's fine, I get it, Jay, Lux waved off any concerns, only having mentioned it to further get under the skin of the kid's bitchy mother. What gifts, father? Dany asked, and Lux couldn't help himself from scooping the adorable little princess into his arms, Raela smiling at the wholesome display, that was completely innocent with absolutely zero nefarious intentions behind the act. Why, your birthright, my love, Lux declared, snapping his fingers as the 16 dragon eggs he'd looted appeared in the room's center, all delicately nestled atop velvet pillows. Dany's little eyes widened, apparently recognizing the scaled stones for what they were, and immediately Lux felt one of the eggs forming a firm bond with the shocked little girl. I think this one likes you, love, Lux chuckled, levitating a vibrant purple egg over that Dany eagerly took into her arms. Honey, I don't believe you'd be making such a show for petrified rock. Have you truly done what I think you have? Raela asked, making Lux pull her into his arm that was free. He was happy to see his mistress learning that there was no need to act all formal in private. It's as you've guessed, my dear. Dragons will be making a return, he told the room, dragging another egg, this one crimson red, into his lover's arms, smiling at her flabbergasted expression. If Lux had to guess, Raela had finally realized he wasn't playing around with her, the fact that she truly held a place in his heart sending the mature beauty into stunned silence. Leaving his woman to her thoughts, Lux looked over to Jay. Boy, quit your lollygagging, and go pick an egg, he ordered his squire, the kid straightening up at the tone he'd used. Why yes sir, Jay saluted, rushing over and grabbing a completely white egg. Reader interaction fuels me, so leave a comment or review and the collective dopamine hits will probably have me pumping out more chapters. Read ahead on my Patreon. Link. patreon.com/CodeKingu. My Pat charges every 30 days so it doesn't matter which day of the month you join. My Pat also required Discord to view content, so if that's something you don't want to deal with, join my Subscribe Star. Link. subscribestar.com/CodeKingu. Join my Discord. Discord. GGVP2Q8XPK4D. 10 comments 0 vote. Chapter 33. New Haven. Disclaimer. I own nothing but my original characters and works. All other characters and worlds belong to their respective owners. They'll never take you from me, my precious, Catelyn murmured to herself, gently stroking her rounded belly. First, the devil stole her husband. Then, the precious little girl that took after her younger self so much was mercilessly ripped from her pleading arms, taken as a mere hostage. And now, even her eldest, her only remaining tie to these dreaded lands grew distant, the nearby head of Castle Serwyn taking over his required training for the lordship he would eventually inherit. Even with her position as the Lady of Winterfell intact, she felt like nothing more than a lost specter wandering these cold halls. What sins had she committed to deserve such a fate? Outside the room, Rana rolled her eyes. She'd been transferred from her station in Bravos to look after the trout bitch, and at this point, she was fairly sure her lord only cared about the child growing in her belly. Rana would report this recent turn of events, but she saw no issue letting the crazy woman stew in her madness for a while. After all, it was all this bitch's fault that she'd had to move from the temperate climate of northern Essos that she'd become fond of. It'd be fine as long as no permanent harm came to the one she was tasked to protect. A new god's conquest. With her golden radiance holding back the clearly magical blizzard, Aurora led the small group of paladins she'd reappropriated directly into the heart of the storm. Her silly father could be quite forgetful at times, she'd long since realized. Or it might be better to say, he could become a little too preoccupied with the hordes of women surrounding him, she wrinkled her snout in disgust. Either way, it was just lucky that she and her sister were there to handle the minor inconveniences that could slip their father's mind. And on this trip, she'd be taking care of one of this world's greatest threats, the revolting undead that were responsible for the razor-sharp, icy winds that would be hounding her men if she weren't there. As a being of light and holiness, the creatures that the locals referred to as the others were a blight that Aurora wouldn't let exist another day, she decided. The only necromancy she could tolerate was that of her father, the undead he created lacking the foul stench of the ones not far from her position. Pausing, she held up a paw, her paladins halting in unison. It seemed her enemies were done playing around with their little weather tricks, rotten men and women now lumbering into view on all sides. HMPH, you all can deal with the small fries, Aurora told her soldiers, scoffing at the shambling corpses. Aurora was sure that no matter how hard the weaklings tried, they wouldn't be able to leave a scratch on the enchanted armor her father made for his paladins. Aurora nodded her head in approval. As expected, the gold-clad warriors moved like a killing machine, spears blurring with each attack never missing their target. So, you finally decided to show yourselves, she mocked, armored undead riding giant spiders approaching as the horde parted. Outsider, you meddle in matters above you, the middle one rasped, making her scoff. You're not the Night King. Let me guess, I'm talking to the one called the Great Other, isn't that right? Aurora sneered. How dare the filthy creature speak to her like that? Not even allowing a reply, Aurora brought forth her might, her golden sigils appearing under the undead leaders, her magic's pure holy aura disintegrating the remaining whites simply by proximity, and her true targets howling in agony and fear. I will have my vengeance for this affront, the Great Other claimed, and Aurora could sense the foul creature attempting to flee the body it had been possessing. Not on my watch, she grinned, a holy lance shooting towards the presence who thought themselves unseen, the wannabe death god obliterated in an instant. All right boys, let's wrap it up, she commanded, forming holy chains to take the White Walkers back with them. Aurora knew her father had an interest in studying the magic they'd been created by. A new god's conquest. Standing on the bow of his flagship with his closest family at his side, Lux smiled as the city created to his specifications neared on the horizon. He felt it was about time he moved from the isolated island of Skagos and into the capital that his future empire would expand from. It's beautiful, master, his favored slave gushed, receiving a fond grope to her plump rear for the excellent sense of taste. And it truly was beautiful if he did say so himself, the common theme being white walls with gold-tinted shingles above, the streets a similar shade constructed of perfectly level stone. But all of this paled in comparison to the palace he'd soon be occupying at the city's center, that, while keeping with the color theme, stood apart with its towering spires connected by ornate bridges truly making it look like something out of a high fantasy setting, which, in reality, was what he'd been quickly turning this previously weak world into. Honey, what have you decided its name shall be? Raela asked, one arm intertwined with his while the other held onto her daughter's hand. The locals have taken to calling the place New Haven. I believe it quite fitting, he told his Valyrian mistress, the stunning woman nodding her agreement. Don't you think it's a bit much? I mean, we get it, you like the color gold, Rose butt in with her astonishingly stupid opinion. So stupid, in fact, that Lux didn't even feel like it deserved a response. As long as there's a training yard, what does the color matter? Val questioned, making him sigh. Sometimes, Lux wondered if he was the only intelligent one in this world. There, Daddy, I think it'll make a wonderful new home, his adorable Delphi cheered him up, his faith restored. Other than his precious daughter's encouragement, the essence gained from this little endeavor also had his spirits high. With this being the greatest influx of essence to date, it was clear that the essence of creation preferred rewarding him for his less violent achievements. Of course, just by the name of the power, it was something of a given, but now he had his confirmation. Still, that didn't mean he was going to start solving all his problems by singing Kumbaya around a campfire. No, at least in his opinion, there were too many fuckers who deserved nothing more than death and destruction. But Lux liked to think of himself as a man of many layers, akin to an onion, or maybe like a cake. Yeah, cake sounded better. Anyway, why pick and choose when he could have it all? He'd act as a bastion of creativity and advancement when he felt like it, and he'd be the good old god who rains down fury and pestilence when that particular mood struck. All in all, Lux was pleased with his current state of affairs, and with his stockpiles nearing what he'd been saving for, he couldn't wait to visit the clusterfuck of a world that Rose came from. So much so, that Lux was pretty sure he'd leave that whole grand parley he'd set up to his dutiful saintess. Yes, the idea had its merits, the primary being, that it would be absolutely hilarious to watch the high and mighty lords groveling in front of his little jade beauty. But like he'd said, he was just a few points from his goal. So, he figured leaving this world with a bang would be his best bet. And what he had in mind would only take a quick pit stop before getting on with the next adventure. Not that he wouldn't be returning anytime soon. He hadn't gone through all the effort of building his new palace for it not to be his primary resting place. Okay, so it was his wizard minions who'd put in the effort, fuck off. By the time he'd finished his monologue, his ship had already made port, his grateful citizens cheering his arrival. Praise be the Lord, Lord Tenebris, you bless us, your grace. The crowd shouted as he waved, letting them know they had his approval. Because they did, in fact, have his approval. While there were foreign merchants here and there, the city's true inhabitants were all his most devout and useful followers, something he'd used a large amount of his gathered faith to ensure safe passage on their pilgrimages from around the world. Yes, your god has arrived. Lux tried calming down the fervent crowd while leading the way towards the waiting carriage, tossing blessings of fortune out like candy, even stopping to kiss the head of a baby shoved into his arms by a devout mother, chuckling as the pretty MILF swooned at his attention. Ignoring the rolling eyes of his lovers and children, Lux eventually took his seat, the dozen white Clydesdales whinnying as they pulled the large stagecoach down the perfectly smooth and clean roads. Yeah, Lux wouldn't allow any nonsense such as chamber pots being dumped out windows in his city, which is why he'd made sure his workers added magical plumbing into every single building. Honestly, the whole place ran on enchantments, and most of the elaborate designs making the place so wonderful wouldn't have been possible without them. The effort was worth it though, Lux thought, enjoying the peaceful ride towards the palace. Wow, Raela and the others gushed after entering the pearly gates, the palace's servants bowing as they passed. Say, master, how about we break in the new bedroom? The always horny Bella suggested. Outstanding idea, love, Lux agreed, hearing a few disappointed sighs as he walked off with his first baby mama. A new god's conquest. Her eyes shut tight, Cersei imagined the large cock piercing her to the core to be that of her beloved Jaime, the fierce rutting she received daily somehow flooding her body and mind with new sensations each and every time. Look at me, the simple command had her ripped away from her fantasies, not hesitating to follow orders as her eyes opened to see the attractive face, the one she was now so familiar with, grinning down at her. She'd quickly learned that any disobedience would only get her a session with the white-haired demoness in return. and that was an experience she dared not even recollect. Cersei would take having her body violated by this man, 100-fold, over the dreaded alternative. It's not your brother giving you these feelings, pet, her rapist taunted, grabbing onto one of her breasts, an involuntary moan slipping past her lips, a long tongue taking the opportunity to entangle her own, the intimate act something she'd formerly only shared with her brother, and now, even that was stolen from her. Cersei's eyes watered, but she held back the coming tears. She wouldn't show this bastard any further weakness, not even as he moaned into her mouth, the feeling of his seed filling her quim forcing her own release. One step closer until the end of her daily torture, she comforted herself. I'm sure you haven't been able to tell, locked away as you've been, but we've moved into my newly built palace, her tormentor told her as she wondered what any of this nonsense had to do with her. With your labor nearing, it'd be a shame to bring a beautiful baby girl into the world while remaining in captivity, he continued, making her snap to look him in the eyes. A girl? She asked, one of the few times she'd spoken to her captors unprompted, and the vile smirk he sent her way at the question had her skin crawling. You'll soon birth a daughter, he replied, the powers she'd witnessed during her captivity making the claim easily believable. But the monster's words didn't stop there, a dread settling over herself like she'd never felt before. I'm sure the girl will take after her gorgeous mother, he whispered into her ear while his warm hand gently stroked above her womb, her hands unable to wrap around her growing babe in defense, arms restrained above her head. What do you want? Why are you telling me this? She nearly begged, sure that the bastard could hear the defeat in her voice. What I want is quite simple, my dear. You'll be released from your cage, and we'll see how long you can behave before corrective measures are needed, he explained, the fact that she was nothing more than a plaything for this powerful man sinking in, a small nod the only reply she could muster up in her current state. Ah, good, but all of that can wait for now, he chuckled, slowly pressing a finger into her tightest passage. I have one last hole to fill up for the day, he said, aligning his manhood as she clenched her mouth shut, hours of reluctant pleasure surely awaiting her immediate future. A new god's conquest. Listening to Lady Raela's lecture, Marjorie happily stroked the golden floof ball napping in her lap, the other girls close to her age hiding their jealousy that Aurora had chosen her company for the day's lesson. Only half paying attention to the advice on courtly matters that she'd already learned from her grandmother, she once again thought about the oddity that her days had turned into. After all, she'd never had imagined life in captivity could be so pleasant. It was honestly suspicious, and she wouldn't let her grandmother's teachings go to waste simply because she was being showered with the greatest of hospitalities. Marjorie had done her best to gain the favor of those with the most influence that she could manage, the task not even being an unpleasant one. The king's daughters, Cassiopeia or Cassie for short, and Aqua, were delightful girls, whom she was more than pleased to have as company. But looking over at the Dornish princesses who still joined these lessons for whatever reason, she hid a sigh after glancing down at her non-existent womanly curves. It was clear that the heir of Dorne and her cousin's position had been greatly elevated. It was also obvious as to the reason. Marjorie guessed that they only deigned the group with their presence to flaunt their new status. If only she were a few years older. By then, Marjorie was sure that her womanly charms would have her gaining a similar status with the mysterious sorcerer king. Still, she figured that even had that been the case, she wouldn't stoop to the levels Princess Arianne surely had. Her grandmother had warned her about the Dornish, and she wouldn't give up her chastity to be nothing more than a paramour. Marjorie, can you tell us what you know of House Redwyn? Lady Raela asked, and Marjorie put on a faint smile as she stood. Their teacher liked to include the members of their class in the lessons to make sure they were paying attention. Luckily, Marjorie always kept an ear on her surroundings even while contemplating the game being played around herself, she thought, standing to give a brief description of one of the most powerful families of her homeland, and the famous fleet they controlled. Thank you dear, the kind former queen offered as Marjorie took her seat. And honestly, that was something that had thrown her for a loop. It was very odd being taught by a woman long presumed past and allegedly raised from the afterlife by the same king she'd been captured by. Nonetheless, she wouldn't let the unexplainable trip her up while playing the game her grandmother had taught her to. Reader interaction fuels me, so leave a comment or review and the collective dopamine hits will probably have me pumping out more chapters. Read ahead on my Patreon. Link. patreon.com/CodeKingu. My Pat charges every 30 days so it doesn't matter which day of the month you join. My Pat also required Discord to view content, so if that's something you don't want to deal with, join my Subscribe Star. Link. subscribestar.com/CodeKingu. Join my Discord. Discord. GGVP2Q8XPK4D. 7 comments 0 vote. Chapter 34. Guests. Disclaimer. I own nothing but my original characters and works. All other characters and worlds belong to their respective owners. Ellaria liked to think of herself as a well-traveled and well-learned woman, her adventures at her lover's side spanning continents, but the sights she bore witness to after reaching their destination had her rethinking everything she'd ever believed. After Ellaria and her two stepdaughters set sail, accompanied by a small entourage of house guards, their original destination had been the North's formerly only port city, White Harbor. However, upon reaching Pentos, they'd received news that, within mere moons, a city like none other, constructed on the banks of a canal that somehow connected the narrow sea to the sunset, was now the new capital, as well as the new trade hub of the North. At the time, she thought it nothing more than half-truths and lies by the invading king to create a facade of strength and stability. After all, how can anything other than a shabby town of timber have been erected within the claimed timeframe? Nevertheless, Ellaria decided that this acclaimed place would be their best bet at finding her captured family, and with the Baron's connections, they easily slipped onto a swan boat happening to be taking a direct route to their target without any the wiser. But oh, how wrong she'd been, Ellaria thought, joining her daughters as their mouths hung open at the sights, the gleaming, towering structures making her wonder if they'd somehow traveled to another world, one straight out of the whimsical tales she'd listened to as a child. Gods be good, how is this possible? Nymeria questioned, speaking for the three of them. We've heard rumors of this king being a powerful sorcerer. It's the only reasonable excuse I could give, Ellaria suggested, now more worried than ever about their chances of reuniting with Arianne and Tyene. At the very least, we shouldn't stand out during our stay here, Nymeria said, and Ellaria had to agree. The city's streets were teeming with all sorts of foreign accents and skin color, they would simply be another few unassuming faces in the crowd. Come, let us find a room to rent, we can wonder about witchcraft once we've settled, Ellaria told them, their guards leading the way after asking around for a decent inn, only for the streets they traveled down to become suspiciously quiet, the shopkeepers boarding their windows as all others made themselves scarce. She was beginning to have a bad feeling about this, and as if her fears had manifested, heavily armored soldiers, clad in gold, poured from the side streets, surrounding their little group more than tenfold. Had they been betrayed so soon? Ellaria didn't even bother drawing the dagger hidden on her thigh. This was an unwinnable fight, and she wouldn't pointlessly risk the lives of her paramour's daughters. Guests from Dorne, His Eminence, Lux Tenebris, invites you to the royal palace, one of the surrounding men announced, making her sigh at being so thoroughly outwitted. At least they were being treated as guests for now. She didn't know if this king practiced the same rites as the rest of Westeros, but surely, they wouldn't be harmed without reason, right? If you will, a carriage has been prepared and we shall escort you to your destination, he offered, but Ellaria knew it wasn't like she had much of a choice in the matter. Very well, but may we know the name of our escort? She agreed, gesturing for her guards to stand down, beginning to move towards the opening of the encirclement. Lazar V. Hassan, 3rd Division Captain of the Lord's Paladins, at your service, the captain introduced, a fist over his heart in what she guessed was some form of salute she was unfamiliar with. Unfortunately, His Eminence's invitation does not extend to your companions, Lazar continued, clearly referring to their retinue of guards. You can't expect us to follow you without protection, she objected. Did they truly expect them to leave their guards behind? Normally, no issue would have been raised, that is, if you had arrived here through legitimate means, but as it stands, aside from the 3 ladies I have orders to escort, as far as I am aware, those in front of us are nothing more than a group of hostile foreign spies, the captain told them, his almost emotionless tone making her assume that he cared only for following the orders he'd received. Ellaria glared. It was clear to her that this was simply a show of force by the king. What are your intentions, Captain Lazar? I have no intentions other than my lord's will, and there is no leniency given towards espionage under his domain. A swift death is all that's deserved, he stated, Ellaria's eyes going wide. Who do you think you are? Obara growled, stepping forward, and Ellaria had to put a hand on the brash young woman's shoulder to keep her from getting them caught in the crossfire. Please, we will go with you, these men are only following orders, she pled, only to see the captain's cold stare completely unmoved. As I have stated, there shall be no leniency, the captain reaffirmed, the words making Obara attempt to struggle from her hold, something the battle-trained girl normally would have been capable of, if not for Nymeria joining in to help stop her sister from getting them all killed. Execute the dissidents, Ellaria heard the command given, her fellow Dornish not even managing to put up a modicum of resistance before meeting their end at the tips of the golden soldiers' gleaming spears. Ellaria clenched a hand around her sheathed blade in frustration. She wasn't familiar with any of the guards personally, but they were loyal veterans of the Martell household, and now, she would have to inform their families that they were slaughtered in the streets like animals. That is, if they even ended up making it out of this mess alive. But at the end of the day, she could only lament her inherent weakness while being forcefully escorted into the domain of the man who stirred up an unimaginable amount of unrest and strife in such a short period of time. A new god's conquest. Nymeria knew that she only had herself to blame for the trouble they now found themselves in. Sure, her father had eventually given them his blessings, but even had he not, she had already planned to slip away unnoticed with her older sister, regardless of his wishes. They'd immediately lost the element of surprise that they were relying on, and now they were being dragged into the lion's den. It truly couldn't have been worse if she'd tried. To think that all of this was meant to rescue the two hostages from the invading king's grasp. And now it was as if they'd served themselves on a silver platter, additional leverage over her family to be sure. Nymeria sighed. She knew that now, their only hope would be charming their way into the king's good graces. The only problem being, no one knew anything about this infamous man. Hopefully, Arianne and Tyene hadn't been sitting around doing nothing. Lost in thought on how they could possibly make the best out of this shitty situation, before she even realized it, they were already stepping out of the carriage and being led through enormous halls that seemed to go on endlessly. And after finally reaching the largest doorway she'd ever seen, Nymeria could honestly say that she'd have never guessed the scene they ended up walking into on the other side. Seated upon a golden throne, a man like none other she'd seen waited. But that wasn't the unexpected bit. No, what had her attention were the two familiar faces, one draped over the man's lap and the other resting in a smaller seat at his side. Arianne, Tyene. Ellaria rushed forwards, two guards grabbing her by the arms before she could near the throne. Normally, such disrespect would be met with harsh punishment. The king glared, and she could feel her legs weakening, almost as if there was an invisible, indescribable force spreading from his seated position. Though, as the family of my newest paramours, there's no need for such measures. Nymeria didn't know why, but the smarmy smile the king wore after giving them that bit of news really had her wanting nothing more than to smack him across that handsome face of his. Well, I'm not one for watching heartfelt reunions. He broke them out of their stupefied silence, lifting Arianne out of his lap. Can I trust you to get your family situated, my dear? He asked Arianne, gently stroking her face after receiving a nod before vanishing from the grand chambers. Wait, where in the seven hells did he go? She gaped. Was this the magic they'd heard whispers of? And now that she took a closer look around, she found that they were now completely left alone, not even a single guard remaining. Nymeria wondered if she was the only one who noticed, because instead of joining her in the shock of what they'd just witnessed, Ellaria ran up the few steps to wrap their wayward family members into her arms, Obara joining shortly after. My sweetlings, thank the gods you're alive. I only wish we could have made it before that sick monster forced the two of you to be with him. Her uncle's paramour wept, and if the situation were different, Nymeria would have complained about the woman being overdramatic. Lux would never, Arianne gasped, seemingly shocked at the simple thought. His grace has a heart filled with nothing but kindness and care, she claimed. You can't be serious, Obara deadpanned at the side as she nodded along with the sentiment. It's true, Lux is the greatest man this world has ever seen. It's our honor to be at his side, Arianne whined at the disbelief. Sister, is this true? Or is this yet another of our cousin's delusions? Nymeria pointedly asked the silent blonde, familiar with the games this troublesome princess often played. Tyene let out a breath. As much as I can hardly believe it myself, everything she says is true, for the most part. What do you children know about anything? Ellaria huffed, crossing her arms under her bust as she eyed the two up and down. Men will take what they can from a girl while it lasts, and the next thing you know, you'll be forgotten and alone while they find a new, younger companion, she told them, for whatever reason deciding that now was the best time to impart her womanly wisdom onto her cousins who only rolled their eyes at the speech. Lux won't abandon us, Arianne firmly denied. Besides, I'm already carrying his child, she ended her statement as if it was a completely normal occurrence, rubbing a hand over the stomach that was yet to show. All right, that was enough for the day, she decided, lowering herself to sit on a close-by ledge, her consciousness slipping from the amount of built-up stress. Nymeria, Nymeria, were the last worried voices she heard before embracing the sweet abyss. Maybe when she woke up, this would have all been a dream. A new god's conquest. It truly was a beautiful land, Lux thought, hovering high above the SOC grasslands. Too bad it's been infested by these damn horse fuckers for so long, he shook his head. Well, all's well that ends well, he muttered under his breath, raising a hand to prepare one of the special moves he'd been working on. Lux carefully controlled his darkness, and egg-sized singularity forming in his palm, but not stopping there, his golden radiance coalesced, surrounding the void in a swirling mass. Yes, he was indeed ripping off the Rasengan without remorse. With mass destruction nonchalantly held in hand, Lux looked down at Vase Dothrak, unable to stop himself from letting out a chuckle. The savages didn't even know the cataclysm that would soon befall their people and culture. He'd have to make sure at least a few survived this to spread the word. Event Horizon, Lux called out the name of his attack, deciding to be a bit theatrical as the abyssal sphere cloaked in light fell onto the doomed city. And in a flash, the sprawling settlement was obliterated, the two bronze horse statues now looming over a perfectly smooth crater, the only remnant left behind. Lux whistled. Damn, that was fucking sweet. He gave himself a pat on the back for coming up with such a badass move, and with nothing else left to do in the area, he vanished from his position high in the sky, reappearing next to his saintess. I see you've already prepared your men, Lux commented, making his gorgeous saintess jump at his sudden appearance. Laughing lightly, he pulled his jade beauty into his embrace before she could get on her knees in a formal greeting. Yes, my lord, I'm ready to set sail on your orders, Lux heard her muffled words as she spoke into his chest. Good, you'll rid this world of the blight calling themselves Dothraki in my name, he told the woman in his arms, stroking her silky black hair. But this time, you won't be leaving for war as my saintess. My lord, have I displeased you? Yaling nearly whimpered, making him feel kind of bad for a split second. Okay, maybe he shouldn't be playing with the emotions of such a loyal woman. Unfortunately for those around him, Lux knew he was a dick at heart and didn't see himself changing his ways anytime soon. All right, don't start crying yet and let me finish my monologue, he tried consoling before the woman ended up soiling his clothes with snot and tears. You played the role of a goddess in Slaver's Bay so well, I've decided that you'll be taking on the position permanently from now on. My lord, I don't deserve, Yaling began before Lux decided to cut of the sure-to-be long-winded self-diatribe, silencing any further complaints by meeting those pouty lips of hers with his own before channeling an absurd amount of divinity, nurturing the infant seed of godhood already within her petite frame. With the former Unsullied's firm belief that Yaling was their spear goddess, she would have eventually ascended. This, however, would have taken years, and would have more than likely required the death of her mortal body. But Lux wanted his pantheon now, damn it. And considering he had the means, he obviously wouldn't wait on nature to take its course. Well, my dear, how do you feel? Lux broke the silence after casually elevating one of his lovers from her mortal shell. I feel more connected to you than ever, my lord. It's wonderful, Yaling gushed, and in a display of boldness that was quite unusual for the dutiful beauty, got onto the tips of her toes, dragging him down for a kiss of her own. Clearly, the first member of his divine court was more than a little grateful, and it showed, his little lover not even paying attention to the nearby paladins awkwardly looking away, pretending like the woman they worshipped as their lady of spears wasn't being defiled in front of their eyes. Lux, of course, welcomed the affection, not even giving two shits about the fact that he was blatantly rubbing his prolific love life in the faces of the many single soldiers. After all, Lux was sure that regrowing the former Unsullied's fifth limb was recompense enough for their current turmoil. He'd even gone as far as giving them all a well above average size because he was a bro like that. Putting his lover down, Lux grinned at her flushed red face before fixing the few strands of disheveled hair back into the neat bun she wore and giving her a final peck on her rosy cheek. We can continue that after you return victorious, my love, he told the slowly recomposing woman. For now, as my goddess of war, cleanse this world of the Dothraki filth. Reader interaction fuels me, so leave a comment or review and the collective dopamine hits will probably have me pumping out more chapters. Read ahead on my Patreon. Link. patreon.com/CodeKingu. My Pat charges every 30 days so it doesn't matter which day of the month you join. My Pat also required Discord to view content, so if that's something you don't want to deal with, join my Subscribe Star. Link. subscribestar.com/CodeKingu. Join my Discord. Discord. GGVP2Q8XPK4D. 9 comments 0 vote. Chapter 35. Punishment. Disclaimer. I own nothing but my original characters and works, all other characters and worlds belong to their respective owners. Screaming into his gag, and struggling against the ropes binding his limbs, tears matching those of his twin streaked down his face. Yet, no matter his struggles, he could do nothing but helplessly watch as the woman he loved more than life itself moaned around another man's cock. Snapping his eyes open and gasping for air, Jaime found himself back on his familiar mattress in Castle Rock. It was a dream, just a dream. They wouldn't dare harm a Lannister, he told himself. Yeah, about that, it definitely wasn't a dream. A smooth voice had him jolting from his bed and reaching for the blade he kept close, freezing after unceremoniously flinging the sheath away and turning to the intruder. With the faint light of the dawn shining through the room's sole window, Jaime could just make out the stranger's form leisurely seated, legs crossed as the man who he thought was only a figment of his imagination sent him a smug smirk. It was him, the same man who'd been violating his sweet sister. He growled, not caring about his nudity as he held the intruder at sword point. Bastard, return my sister. Jaime had no idea if this was simply his drunken hallucinations, or the rumored sorcery that the king who abducted his sister wielded, but even if there was nothing more than the smallest chance of getting his love back, he was going to take it. Hey, and give up such a wonderful cunt. I think not, the bastard drawled, the reminder of what he'd witnessed in his dreams making his anger overflow, sending his sword piercing forward without caring about the consequences. But instead of the expected sound of sharp metal slicing through flesh, Jaime only heard the thunk of his blade hitting wood, his long sword harmlessly passing through his target's body, not a trace of blood in sight. Nice try, the man chuckled. But for that, I'll be spending some extra time with that lovely sister of yours. At those words, Jaime's wrath washed away, replaced by the same despair and desperation he felt while forced to watch the rape of his sister. What do you want? Why are you doing this? He asked, letting go of the hilt of his sword, the weapon clanging to the stone floor. Ah, you twins are so alike. Your sister asked me something similar not too long ago, the loathsome man commented, not answering his questions. Anyways, I think I've wasted enough of my valuable time tormenting a little worm. So, sweet dreams, Lannister, he further gloated before vanishing into thin air. Jaime roared, upending the room's small dining table, a pitcher of wine spilling as he paced back and forth. He didn't know what to do. He also wasn't sure that this whole nightmare of an event even happened. For all he knew, this was the work of his recent bout of alcoholism and grief. But there was nothing he could do, and after further tearing his room apart in rage, and scaring away a young maid who came to check on him, Jaime collapsed back onto his mattress, exhausted, only to find himself once again bound to a chair in the corner of a lavish chamber, his sister's face forced into a pillow as the same bastard slowly worked his cock into her back passage. Only able to helplessly watch, Jaime swore vengeance, and even though he didn't know how, he'd not relent until drawing his dying breath. A new god's conquest. With a pair of half-lidded emerald eyes staring up at him, Lux groaned as cherry lips suckled on his left nut, a gentle tongue lapping across his caramel skin. You spoil me, love, he praised, receiving a hum in return that only added to the pleasure he felt. Moving up from his balls, his lovely rose trailed her lovely mouth from the base of his cock, slowly, languidly, to the tip, all while keeping those gorgeous eyes locked onto his own. Baby, have you given any more thought about my request? The red-headed seductress asked, teasing his bulbous head with those pouty lips of hers. I think there's a good chance I could be persuaded, Lux told his adorable lover, the girl knowing that asking for anything during their throes of passion would return the best outcomes. A few days back, Lux told all his women that he'd soon be opening a portal back to the world Rose came from, and aside from the expected, none showed much of an interest for going on an adventure in a new world. A bunch of pampered bitches, is what they were. But that was besides the point. What the little harlot currently worshipping his manhood was after was obvious. Rose wanted one thing, and one thing only, to be the next of his paramours to carry his child. And, honestly, as his young lover speared herself onto his rock-hard shaft, her convulsing throat massaging his sensitive glands, Lux didn't think he had it in himself to deny the girl's wishes. After all, the only reason he'd held off on seeding the girl's fertile womb was the fact that he knew Rose would regret not having her friends from Hogwarts involved in the kid's childhood. But now that she'd be joining him on his trip to her world within the month, that point was pretty much moot. Though, he didn't think he'd be mentioning his willingness before the night's end, because the girl's eagerness to please was just too damn attractive. Almost as if to prove his words, Rose's next actions had him ready to blow his load, her mouth and tongue now solely focused on his tip as one hand stroked his saliva-slick shaft while the other fondled his contracting sack. And that sexy grin she sent with her eyes let him know that she knew that he knew that she too knew that he knew. Where was he going with that? Whatever, fuck it. The point was, he was ready to bust, and after grabbing a handful of her long hair, Lux readily released his first climax into his lover's provocative mouth. NNGH, you taste so good, Lux, but you know I'd prefer being filled in another hole, Rose sexily whined, not leaving a drop behind after swallowing his seed. And you know that was far from tonight's last release you'll be getting from me, he told his lover, pulling the sexy redhead onto his lap and taking one of her pink nipples into his mouth as his hands played with the rest of her exquisite body. Even without the physique boost that came along with carrying his progeny, Rose was, without a doubt, one of the most beautiful of his girls, perhaps another benefit of being a protagonist, he supposed. And that only had him looking forward to seeing her with a belly swollen with child, something he felt was becoming more and more likely as Rose worked her magic. A new god's conquest. Olenna steepled her hands together as she glared daggers at her buffoon of a son. Seated across the tea table as he nervously fidgeted in place, she wondered how such an imbecile could have stemmed from her loins. Mace had rushed from the Westerlands with the goal to rally an army, only for her to talk some sense into that thick skull of his. And now, he was back at his usual antics of creating more problems that she would have to clean up. Mother, is there something you wanted to discuss? The fool asked, twiddling his fat fingers as he lacked the spine to even meet her scolding gaze. Tell me, son of mine, what in seven hells made you think that ordering a trade embargo was the smart thing to do? She glared, feeling the urge to whack her son across the head with her cane. Already, the peasants have the gall to flee our lands on the Silver Wolf's ships, and that's not even mentioning that the king behind them is the one who abducted our sweet Marjorie. So, banning trade with the company is the logical answer, Mace replied in a tone as if he wasn't an imbecile. Giving in to the temptation, Olenna couldn't help herself from hitting the fool across from her in the shin. Mace, what makes you think that further angering those responsible for Marjorie's safety is a good idea? She hollered, sure her face had gone red from the excursion. And forget about the peasants. The trade with the North is bringing in more than triple that of any loses. But mother, her son began, wincing at the sudden jolt of pain. No buts, Mace, now get out of my sight and fix your mistakes, she waved off, going back to picking at the wonderful selections of new cheeses imported from the newly formed kingdom, ignoring her son's blusters as he waddled away. A new god's conquest. Asha evilly smirked as she skulked through the palace's halls, no one the wiser with her perfect disillusionment charm surrounding her form. She honestly couldn't believe the stupidity of the woman. The gall of her so-called master to teach her the skills that would end up being the whore's downfall. Asha was sure she'd look back on the ridiculousness of the situation with fondness after her escape and rise to power. Because, with the magic she now grasped, there would be nothing stopping her ascent. She could already envision it. Herself on the Seastone throne, her hordes of iron fleets ruling the waves as she took the iron price from all who defied her. Speeding up her pace and holding back from bursting out into maniacal laughter, Asha finally reached her bitch of a master's private chambers. And as she planned, the woman was alone for the night, not even bothering to lock the door of the home she felt so safe in, just another of the many mistakes the cunt would soon regret. With her prey in sight, Asha drew her driftwood wand, the core made from the heartstring of a kraken, at least that was what her master had claimed, ready claim to her vengeance. Avada Kedavra, she whispered, the sickly green spell snaking across the short distance and hitting her target without a fuss. Hey, I won't deny that you have my gratitude, bitch. After all, without you, I wouldn't have gained such power, Asha chuckled, twirling her magical focus between her fingers with a flourish. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough that I'd forgive your affronts towards my person. Rot in hell, she muttered, turning to take her leave. No, I don't think I will be. A familiar, mocking voice had her freezing in her steps, that same fear she felt while chained to the stone ritual platform returning. Whipping around with her wand ready, Asha faced the woman who should have been a quickly cooling corpse, only able to throw out the first spell that came to mind in her panic. Facing her naughty apprentice as she lounged across her mattress, Bella casually swatted away the blasting curse that the girl desperately threw her way, very much looking forward to the punishment she had planned. Avada Kedavra, Asha screamed, one final attempt at her life that, of course, achieved absolutely nothing. Silly, apprentice of mine, I'd really like to know what made that pretty little head of yours believe you actually stood a chance, Bella drawled, said apprentice not responding on account of the silent petrification curse she'd sent her way after that last attempt. Ah, but don't worry about answering right away. Soon, that foul mouth will be used in all sorts of interesting ways, she giggled, rolling from her comfortable position on the mattress before unceremoniously flopping the teen over to take her place. Deciding to set the mood, Conjured Rope had the young girl's limbs spread wide towards each post of the bed frame, and with a snap, Asha was returned to being as naked as the day she was born, a hairless slit on display, reminiscent of how this whole thing had started, Bella thought. Master, would you like to join me in punishing this disobedient apprentice of mine? She called out to no one, sure that her master would show up if he so desired. Some light exercise first thing in the morning would be just swell, Bella heard her master's sexy voice reply, one of his hands wrapping around her stomach as the other fondled her bosom. Turning around, she found her master in nothing but a thin, silken robe. Acting on the opportunity, Bella eagerly returned her master's groping, squirming her hands underneath the loose garment to get a feel at those wonderfully chiseled muscles. Pausing, Bella realized she was getting ahead of herself. She needed to get on with what she'd called her master for, lest they end up distracted in each other's ministrations. Come now, master, let's see to my apprentice's punishment, she purred, placing a light kiss on the corner of her love's lips before leading him over to the tied-up girl. Helping her master out of his robe, Bella nearly couldn't hold back her anticipation, pleased to see his eyes drinking in the body she'd had a hand in enhancing, his beautiful cock growing firm as he knelt before his prize. I must say, you've got wonderful taste, my dear Bella, her master praised, the usual butterflies that filled her tummy every time he complimented her returning. Your pleasure is my satisfaction, master, she vowed, reaching over to gently stroke the now fully erect manhood. One moment, master. It wouldn't do for the little bitch to be unconscious for what's to come, Bella said, giving one of Asha's modest tits a tight slap, the counter curse on her palm making the girl splutter awake as she frantically looked around, finally noticing the marvel of a man between her virgin legs. What the fuck? Let me go, you damn fuckers. Asha began her tirade, struggling against her binding, not that she stood any chance of freeing herself. Quiet, Bella hissed before sending a stinging hex straight to the girl's clit, the little pest squealing like a stuck pig that had her and her master chuckling as they glanced at each other. While I'm quite sure that this won't be your last attempt at defiance, just know that punishment will be awaiting you each and every time, she told the glaring girl as she smirked, quickly guiding her master's large rod into Asha's pretty pussy before the little bitch could make any further comments on the matter. As the former virgin moaned around her master's divine cock, Bella wondered how long it would be before her rebellious apprentice purposely sought punishment. She was sure that no woman could resist her master's sway after enough time experiencing the pleasures he could draw out. Reader interaction fuels me, so leave a comment or review and the collective dopamine hits will probably have me pumping out more chapters. Read ahead on my Patreon. Link. patreon.com/CodeKingu. My Pat charges every 30 days, so it doesn't matter which day of the month you join. My Pat also requires Discord to view content, so if that's something you don't want to deal with, join my Subscribe Star. Link. Subscribestar.com/CodeKingu. Join my Discord. Discord. GGBP2Q8XPK4D.